Chapter 1473. In the void of the universe, a flock of geese flew over from afar. The geese in the void were different from the geese in the mortal world. In fact, in the mortal world, geese were just a literary name for ordinary geese to show how far they could fly. Geese passed on letters, fish passed onto a ruler. It was just a kind of artistic process. The geese in the void of the universe were the real geese. They were demonic beasts that stood at a higher position in the pyramid of demonic beasts. They were actually a variation of the Great Peng's bloodline, just like how the peacock's bloodline was inherited from the phoenix. They had a great background, and a great background. It was just that their bloodline was not as noble as that of the immemorial beasts. This large space was no longer under the control of humans. It was the size of dozens of universes. In fact, in this place, there was no strict distinction between the so-called universes. This was because the demonic beasts did not pay much attention to this. They were even too lazy to give it a name. Whoever occupied it would be given the name of that person. This kind of space was not rare in the void of the universe. In fact, in a strict sense, it was far more than the space occupied by humans. After all, in the universe, they were the real natives. This was the world of demonic beasts. The immemorial beasts' bloodline inheritance, demonic beasts, void beasts, yes, including Zerg. Of course, just like how they were not welcomed in the human world, Zerg was also not welcomed here. Because of their terrifying reproductive ability, any race would feel threatened. Zerg was a beast. Immemorial beasts were rare and lived in seclusion. Therefore, in this barren space to humans, it was the world of demonic beasts and void beasts. Correspondingly, they were also the two most opposite species. In the eyes of humans, wasn't this killing each other? But in the eyes of demonic beasts, they were completely different. Just like how demonic beasts looked at humans, they still beat humans until their brains turned into dog brains. It was the same logic. The biggest competition was not the competition between selling white flour and steamed buns, but the competition between selling white flour and selling lime. This was an ocean of demonic beasts. They lived and grew here. They rarely went to the human world because humans were too cunning. Similarly, human cultivators rarely came here because demonic beasts were too bloody. But this did not mean that humans and demonic beasts were complete opposites. Just like how demonic beasts were often treated as friends in the human world, the demonic beasts here did not necessarily want to kill humans as soon as they saw them. Demonic beasts also treated humans as friends, hoping to learn some non-instinctive and acquired knowledge from them. In short, those who looked similar but were not of the same race were the true enemies. Those who looked completely different and were not of the same race were easier to accept. This was the inexplicable exclusivity of living creatures. There were a total of 13 geese in this flock, and they were arranged in a standard formation. In the atmosphere, this arrangement was very aerodynamic, but in the void, it was completely meaningless. It was more of a kind of deterrence, a kind of ritual of traveling. Among the primordial beasts, the Great Peng was the one that paid the most attention when traveling. Thus, it had inherited this bad habit in its bloodline. It didn't matter if it flew fast or not, but it had to fly beautifully. This was the most important. This flock of demonic beasts flew beautifully. The only flaw was that beside the leading demonic goose, there was a small demonic goose that did not match the other demonic beasts. Demonic beasts were called demonic beasts not only because they could fly far, but also because of their huge size. An adult demonic goose had a wingspan of 300 feet. However, this strange demonic goose only had a wingspan of 30 feet. It was even smaller than a newborn demonic goose. Taking a closer look, it looked like a winged man, because its main body had a standard human face. From head to toe, it had all the body parts of a human, including the muttering ball in the middle. Taking a closer look, it was not a winged man, because it had no feathers. Moreover, its wings seemed to be fake. They were flapping very unnaturally. Demonic goose. These wings are not right. Is there anything bigger and more majestic? It would be best if the colors were more gorgeous. The kind that would have 5-colored auspicious clouds when you flapped them? The demonic beasts of demonic beasts were still chattering. The leading demonic goose was helpless. You should be content. This pair of wings of yours is made up of dozens of feathers from each demonic goose. If you really make them bigger and more majestic, you'll be satisfied. I will become a bald chicken. Another demonic goose cackled. Our demonic goose race only has two colors, black and white. Demonic beasts of demonic beasts, if you want to be prettier, you can color it yourself. However, you will not be able to fly with the effect of 5-colored auspicious clouds. If you want the effect of auspicious clouds, you can ask the peacock race when you have the chance to meet them. See if they are willing to pluck their feathers for you. A flock of demonic geese jeered. The peacock race cherished their feathers the most. Not to mention dozens of feathers to make up his wings. They would not even give him a single feather. Lu Xiaoyi and this flock of demonic geese met in a large-scale astronomical phenomenon. To cultivators, not only would humans deliberately run into large-scale astronomical phenomena to seek stimulation, but demonic beasts also loved to do so. Especially the demonic geese who loved to fly. They used flying in large-scale astronomical phenomena as a way to train their abilities. Just like how sea swallows loved to fly in storms, this was their instinct. However, their instincts could also sometimes harm others. This flock of demonic geese fell into trouble when the astronomical phenomenon changed drastically. Those who drowned would always be able to swim, and those who died from flying would not be able to escape because they could fly. Lu Xiaoyi also comprehended the Tao realm in the astronomical phenomenon. By chance, he gathered a group of demonic geese. One of them had theoretical knowledge, while the other had instinctive divine abilities. They supported each other and flew out without losing a single one. The demonic geese were very straightforward. They belonged to the species that did not dislike humans. Moreover, they had a natural instinct for good and evil. Gradually, they gathered together and became familiar with each other. Lu Xiaoyi even dressed himself up as a demonic goose and enjoyed himself. They flew in the same direction. They were happy to travel together because there was a talkative human. Flying was no longer boring. Actually, we can change the formation. There are many other choices besides the demonic goose formation. Long snake formation, square formation, circle formation, contract formation, knife formation, etc. There are too many. How about one person carries the other 12 and fly?
We can all take turns.
The others can even take a nap. Lu Xiaoyi always had countless bad ideas. However, the demonic geese were stubborn. Perhaps all demonic beasts were like this. They were unwilling to change and were more inclined to respect tradition. The leader of the demonic geese rejected him without any hesitation.
No.
Our formation is not just for flying to look good. It also contains an offensive formation. When there is a chance, I will let you experience our demonic geese feather storm. Then you will understand the meaning of flying like this. Lu Xiaoyi was disdainful. I don't see it. If we change the formation, will we not be able to release the demonic geese feather storm? The only advantage of flying like this is that whoever shits in front will not suffer. Chapter 1474. The flock of geese had long gotten used to this human's weird way of thinking. In their eyes, humans were all monsters, and sooner or later, they would be tormented by their own thoughts and turn into lunatics. But this didn't mean that they hated this human. On the contrary, they felt that this human was a very interesting lunatic. Lu Xiaoyi was enjoying himself. He felt very relaxed when he was with the flock of geese. Everyone was traveling together, exploring the celestial phenomena together, adventuring together, searching for instinctive happiness together, and cursing at each other as they cooperated. You call me an idiot, I call you trash. He really became a member of the flock of geese. This was what he thought, and the flock of geese also thought so, at least on this journey together. Regarding the ancient cosmic phenomena, the demon beasts had their own intuition and instinctive understanding. They might not be able to explain everything, and they might not be able to come up with a theoretical conclusion, but they could always find the correct way to deal with the countless complicated changes. In this kind of journey, Not only the celestial phenomena were his teachers, but so were the geese. He also had the profound understanding of the human sages and his basic understanding of the innate Tao. With such a foundation, his learning efficiency was much faster than the average person who comprehended the 5 ties. Among the 36 innate Taos, the 5 ties was the most boring and uninteresting. It was also the great Tao that couldn't be directly reflected in battle. If the 36 innate Taos were to be compared to a scientific system, then the Taos such as fate, morality, time, space, and cause and effect belonged to the mysterious system of the innate Taos. They were lofty symbols. Slaughter, destruction, 5 elements, yin and yang, thunder, strength, and so on belonged to the application system. Using his understanding in the future, countless applications could be derived from them: Tai Yi, Tai Chu, Tai Shi, Tai Su, Tai Chi, primal chaos, and so on were the basic theoretical system. Just like in the technological society of his previous life, people tended to favor the application system that could easily produce results and earn a lot of money, and were unwilling to work on the basic theories. Being eager for quick success and instant benefits was not the privilege of ordinary mortals. It was the same for cultivators as well. Everyone understood the importance of basic research. It was the cornerstone of how high a building could be built. However, if one were to ask a specific person to spend his entire life on this kind of foundation, to lay the foundation for other people's cultivation, to build stairs. At present, there were very few cultivators who were pure like this. They were so few that it was almost negligible. Everyone was like a swarm of bees that threw themselves into the application of basic research, just to produce results faster and see results. Lu Xiaoyi, because of his own cultivation needs, because of the coincidence when he became a nascent soul, and because of his desire for grandiose achievements, he forcefully linked his growth process with the development and changes of the universe. Perhaps he could indeed avoid the 2 more familiar systems of the debilitating state to become an immortal and the ancient method of cutting the corpse to become an immortal, but he had set up a new system for himself. Everything had to be explored by himself. His method was a one-off method that could only be encountered by chance. The key to its feasibility was the change of epochs. If he missed this period and wanted to rely on the changes of the universe to promote his realm growth, it would be a joke. Speaking of which, if the epoch didn't change and the world didn't change, how many years would a human like you need to live and die with the universe? Even if you added hundreds and thousands of generations of your descendants, it wouldn't be enough. Therefore, when he returned to the 5th ring, he left his sword plate technique at the dome, but didn't mention a word about his path of ascension. It was because his method didn't need to be spread and couldn't be replicated. If he casually took it out, it would mislead the younger generation. In the past few years, he had also entered several celestial phenomena and followed the great geese to pretend to be wild geese. The only bad thing was that these geese, who relied entirely on instinct, didn't seek to understand the Tao state. They flew in, circled around a few times, and then flew away. They were different from humans in the process of thinking. You mother****, can't you just stand here and take a closer look at it? It's like someone is urging you to die. The brains of you great geese are as short as your intestines. From your mouth to your ass, it's a straight path. Once good things come in, you can't digest them all. It's a pity that you're born with such talent. Lu Xiaoyi was extremely vicious. Wild Goose King didn't show any weakness. Damn you. You humans have long intestines, but it's because you have too many twists and turns. A simple principle becomes a mess when it comes to you. Is there a need for that? In the end, what you think of and add on are all hypocrisy, complications, and pompous. A good Tao has been turned into a crooked path by you guys. The 5 manifestations of Khanate can be turned into too white, too big, too tight, too soft, too watery. Tell me, what are you thinking? Lu Xiaoyi liked the great geese. One of the biggest reasons was that they liked to bicker and could take a joke. This was a very good quality, at least to him. Such a journey wouldn't be lonely. Cultivation was one aspect of a journey, learning was another aspect, and meeting different people along the way was another aspect. All of these aspects added up to a perfect journey of cultivation. His journey would last for 1,000 years, and he wouldn't be as stupid as Qing Xian, exiling himself like an ascetic monk. That wasn't cultivation, that was self-abuse. Judging from the state of mind, how good could the effects of cultivation be? His journey of cultivation should be colorful, such as pretending to be a zombie or a guest. As they flew, Lu Xiaoyi started to yell again. Wild Goose King, you seem to be going in the wrong direction? Don't bully me because I'm not familiar with this place. As long as I'm in the starry sky, I can find the right way even with my eyes closed. Wild Goose King laughed. Haha, you're so smart.
How can you notice such a small change?
Is this the experience of being tricked by people in the human world? You're right, we're going to take a detour to join a gathering of beasts. Some of our friends are in trouble, and we need to help them. Why are you scared? If you're scared, you can go on your own. No one's forcing you. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Have you heard of a swordsman who's afraid of trouble? I'm not afraid of trouble, but I'm afraid that if I kill too many people, I'll drag your great geese down. Let me say this in advance. Once I start fighting, I don't care about anything else. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Wild Goose King didn't care. Of course, it knew that the human swordsman's orthodoxy was good at killing, and they were one of the best among the human cultivators. However, in the space of the beast territory, which beast clan wasn't bloodthirsty? If the human cultivators liked to fight here, then they must have come to the wrong place. The Battle of the Five Rings, the Battle of Zhou, had a profound impact on the human world. As time passed, it began to spread, but no matter how much it spread, it couldn't reach the space of the beast territory. This place and the human world of cultivation were two different worlds. Humans never cared about this place, just like how they didn't care about the internal strife of humans. Chapter 1475. Lu Xiaoyi didn't ask any more questions. It was just a detour. To him, there was no harm in seeing more demonic beasts, not to mention danger. It was just like a demonic beast appearing in a human gathering. No one would care about it. After millions of years of cultivation, it was impossible for all races to integrate, but the communication between each other was real. Unless a large number of human cultivators appeared in the beast territory, or a large group of demonic beasts appeared in the human airspace, it would attract extra attention. The beast territory's airspace was not a place where one could kill anyone on sight. Just like the human airspace, the demonic beasts were allowed to travel freely. This was a great era of cultivation. As they bickered and teased, more demonic beasts appeared in their sight. Lu Xiaoyi asked, "What conflict? Is it with the void beasts?" Yanjun laughed. "You don't understand the beast territory. Here, we are mortal enemies with the void beasts. If we fight with the void beasts, it will be a war, not a helping hand. It will be a conflict between demonic beasts. You know, there are many groups among us demonic beasts, just like you humans." Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. "You don't learn the good stuff, but you learn quickly by forming groups." Yanjun glared at him and said, "We are not trying to form a gang. The relationship between demonic beasts is actually very simple. It is basically determined by blood. If the blood is similar, then the relationship is needless to say. If the blood is unrelated, then it is hard to say. For example, the race we are going to help comes from the supreme existence of the immemorial sacred beasts, the phoenix. As for us, our blood comes from another supreme existence of the immemorial sacred beast, the great rock. Among the immemorial sacred beasts, the phoenix and the great rock have a different status. As their bloodline inheritance, we demonic beasts have a special status." Lu Xiaoyi's heart skipped a beat. The bloodline inheritance of the phoenix? Is it a peacock? Yanjun nodded. "At least you are knowledgeable."
It is a peacock.
"How about it? It is not a loss to take a detour this time, right? You will never see a phoenix, but peacocks are also rare among the demonic beasts. Don't you want a pair of cool wings? Why don't you ask them? Maybe they'll give you a pair?" This was a joke. No one could pluck the feathers from a peacock's body unless they were willing. However, this race was exceptionally arrogant. They were even more narcissistic than the great rocks. How could they easily satisfy the request of an incompetent human? Lu Xiaoyi was a little excited. Yanjun, you have a long neck and small eyes. You don't have a good eye for people. What knowledge! Do you think I've never seen a peacock? Let me tell you, I have a lot of peacock friends. Have you heard of the Smoke Peacock clan? The Wild Goose King was taken aback. It had to admit that this guy had his ways. He was a country bumpkin who had seen the world. You actually know about the Smoke Peacock? Impressive. You have some knowledge. Do you know how many branches the Peacock clan is divided into? Lu Xiaoyi said casually. I was just about to ask. Yanjun was very familiar with it. Phoenixes and elephants have 5 colors. The red one is the phoenix, the yellow one is the tawu, the green one is the luan, the purple one is the tawu, and the white one is the swan. Among them, the one with the strongest ability, the one who could rise from the flames and descend with fate in hand, was the phoenix. But in reality, there are 5 different types, and their abilities are different. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There are 5 siblings. One of them is the son of the first wife and has a noble bloodline. The other 4 are the children of concubines, born of a mistress. Is that right? The Wild Goose King could not continue. This explanation was very vulgar, but it was also very vivid. It basically explained the Phoenix clan. Among them, the Phoenix clan was loved by all. Whether it was their own ability, inherited bloodline, or the power of their clan, they were all orthodox. The others were a little less interesting. Yes, they were the children of concubines who were not liked by others. It could only continue. Since there are 5 types, their bloodlines will naturally be passed down to 5 types. The descendants of the Phoenix are called the Red Peacock clan. The descendants of the Luan are called the Green Peacock clan. The descendants of the Tawu are called the Yellow Peacock clan. The descendants of the Swan clan are called the Purple Peacock clan. The descendants of the Swan clan are called the White Peacock clan. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. No, I don't understand. You've been talking for so long. Where is the Smoke Peacock clan? Could it be that they are the illegitimate children? The Wild Goose King was stunned. This person's poisonous mouth was right. You can't say that they are illegitimate children, right? Because the status of the phoenix and the roc is too special among the primordial sacred beasts, their descendants must be conferred by the immortal court. For example, the descendants of the phoenix who have been conferred the title are the Red Peacock clan. Those who haven't are the Smoke Peacock clan. The difference is actually just the name. In fact, they are the same. In the human world, maybe illegitimate children are more loved? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. What kind of logic is that? I've never heard of it. In the human world, illegitimate children are bullied because their family background is not strong enough, and because they don't have an official title. Well, one is in the family planning system, and the other is outside the family planning system. Can't they just pay a fine and make up a household registration? Why do they have to make such a clear distinction? The Immortal Court has nothing better to do. By the way, which unit of the Immortal Court is in charge of this? The Wild Goose King was speechless. I'm not familiar with the Immortal Court. You only know how to ask all these nonsensical questions. By the way, where was I just now? Lu Xiaoyi was even more speechless. You old bird, you haven't told me which peacock clan you are going to help. The Wild Goose King laughed. It's the Green Peacock clan. They have lived here all their lives. They have never left. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Then, where do the other peacock clans usually live? Or do they have no fixed residence? The Wild Goose King snorted. How would I know where they live? I have never been out of this area. Anyway, the 6 peacock clans should each have their own place. They're more arrogant and like to be alone. They can't get along with other clans. Yes, the more noble the clan is, the more they are like this. They are solitary and silent. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. The Wild Goose King, your background is not low either. I don't see that silence is golden. They are just a bunch of chatterboxes, By the way, even a noble clan like the Peacock is divided into 5 or 6 clans. What about the Roc clan? It can't be just the Great Goose clan, right? The Wild Goose King was very proud. The Roc clan's bloodline has many branches. Besides us, there are the Golden Eagle, the Crossing Gull, the flying bird, the taowu, the menjing, the spotted wu, and so on. There are dozens of them. I can't tell you all at once. You only need to know that there are many more of them than the peacock clans. But in this area, there are only the green peacock clan and the great goose clan. Lu Xiaoyi came to a conclusion. That can only mean that your ancestor, the rock, has a messy private life. He is really not picky about food. You're talking about those with close bloodlines. If you include those with distant bloodlines, are all the winged ones the descendants of the rock clan? Chapter 1476. The flock of geese was approaching, and at the same time, there were also many demonic beasts rushing over here. They were neither friendly nor distant, and Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Goose King, so I figured out that only you swan geese and green peacocks are on the same side, and the rest are your enemies? Liao asked. This is not a good fight. I say you should just admit defeat. Don't make the crowd angry. Lu Xiaoyi's words touched Yanjun's heart. Because the two races thought highly of themselves, they did not have any affinity with other beasts in this beast territory. They thought they were born noble and superior, so they ordered others around. When something really happened, other than the two races helping each other, no other races would step forward to help them. The green peacock race had a good character. They never took advantage of other races. They were just a little arrogant. Such a character was not easy to get along with, so they attacked together. Of course, it was not the kind of attack that would kill all of them. Although they were all demonic beasts, they still had a basic sense of propriety. In the beast tide, they would fight with their fists. This was the most popular way to solve conflicts in the beast territory. Therefore, the geese flew slowly and were not in a hurry. Because of the ancient rules of demonic beasts, the peacock race was not in danger of extinction. Along the way, Yanjun introduced them to him. What kind of demonic beasts were they? Where did they come from? What kind of great demonic beasts were they? Where did they come from? This bloodline was a little mixed, that magical power was not worth mentioning, and so on. Hearing this, Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat amused. This was a typical example of arrogance. When facing humans, they could still maintain a certain degree of reverence, but when facing the same monster beast clan, they were filled with a sense of superiority. In this point, they were actually no different from humans. They were also a group of interesting friends, who did not have a few strengths and weaknesses. After flying for several months, they finally arrived at a place called the Peacock Stone. Of course, this was what the peacocks and the great geese called it. The other demonic beasts called it the Roaring Stone because the demonic beasts that competed for territory here with the green peacocks were called nightingales. The peacock stones were a group of meteorites. Thousands of large and small meteorites were intertwined together. This was an extremely common celestial phenomenon in the origin world. It couldn't even be called a celestial phenomenon because the environment here was very peaceful and there weren't any force field fluctuations. In the void of the universe, there was no way to mark boundaries. Therefore, regardless of whether it was demonic beasts or humans, the cornerstone of determining the airspace was to find a fixed celestial body and then use it as a foundation to include the surrounding space into their domain. The dispute between the green peacock and the roe owl originated from the airspace of this group of meteorites. There was no need to elaborate on the twists and turns involved. Throughout history, regardless of whether it was humans or beasts, disputes over territory had always been a situation where everyone was right, and everyone was right. How could there be a conclusion? On the largest meteorite in the middle of the group of meteorites, there were two tribes standing opposite each other. One group was made up of beautiful green-glazed peacocks, each with a feathered screen. The other group had the body of a goat, the face of a human, the teeth of a tiger, the claws of a human, and the voice of a baby. They were called the roe owls. The feathered screen was not for the sake of beauty, but for a form of combat readiness. It was not entirely green, but colorful and covered in a misty green light. This should be the entire tribe, because there were also some small Jean Dan peacocks among them. In total, there were less than 100 of them. In terms of numbers, it was more or less the same as the Smoke Peacock tribe in the Five Rings Peacock Palace. It was unknown whether it was because of the difficulty of survival or the bloodline restriction. The number of roe owls on the opposite side was even smaller, less than 50. They also brought the old and the young with them. From this point alone, it was not a fight to the death between the tribes. It was more like a competition of strength. It was just a gathering of demonic beasts to resolve some of their internal disputes. This was the essence of it. Yen Jun looked at him and said, Juan. Later, we will stand together with the Peacock tribe. However, I will be honest with you. Due to the pride of the Peacock tribe, they are not willing to accept help from other tribes easily, especially humans. In terms of the nature of this dispute, it is also an internal conflict of the demonic beast tribe. It is not suitable to involve other tribes. As long as we have something to do with you humans, there will be endless disputes. A small matter will become a big matter, and a big matter will spread. Therefore, I will leave Yen Qi to accompany you. You can stay outside and watch the show. When this matter is over, no matter the result, we will go on a long journey. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and obeyed the arrangement. This was the right thing to do. No matter where it was the most basic principle to not involve other tribes in a fight between tribes. This was especially true for humans. Now that the general trend of the universe was changing, the human forces were scheming against each other in order to gamble on their fate. Everyone wanted to pull more participants to strengthen their forces. The demonic beasts were not stupid. They were not willing to get involved in the trivial matters of humans. It was also good to watch the show. Lu Xiaoyi did not have the ambition to save all the tribes. The green peacock was not the smoke peacock. They were not the same thing. Yen Qi was the youngest of the 12 great geese in the group. He was just about to enter the level of a monarch. His combat power was not strong enough. Therefore, it was natural to leave him outside to accompany the guest. How will it be resolved? Reason? Fight with their fists? It will not be a fight that will last for years, right? I can't afford to wait. Seventh goose was also a chatterbox. In fact, almost all the geese in the flock were chatterboxes. The true meaning of the phrase, geese delivering letters, since ancient times was not that the geese carried a letter back and forth. Instead, it referred to the fact that they loved to deliver information with their mouths. How can it be a fight that will last for years? Do you think this is the human world? We demonic beasts are the most straightforward. Usually, we follow ancient precedents and decide the outcome of a few battles. As for how many battles we will have, it is not clear. It depends on the scale of the matter and the size of the territory. Based on my experience, the Peacock Stone's airspace is worth about 3 battles. It will not be too many. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Little 7, can you help me borrow a few feathers from them to put on my wings? I will give you a few jars of good wine. Yen Qi shook his head.
No.
I will be scolded. Jun, don't harm me. The Peacock tribe does not give away their feathers easily unless they are very close to them. Didn't you say that you have friends in the smoke peacock? Why don't you go yourself? The demonic beasts below gradually gathered. Basically, all the demonic beasts had come to support them. However, the difference in numbers was huge. The green peacock only had the help of the great geese, while the roe owl had the support of more than 10 tribes. The rest of the tribes were just here to watch the show. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. The demonic beast's world was very strange. Those with noble bloodlines did not have the consciousness of being a leader, while those with inferior bloodlines did not know how to respect each other. It was a little chaotic. If a cultivation world war really came, what would these fellows be like? Amidst the commotion, the demonic beasts began to gather. Compared to the human Dharma assembly, there were no preachings. Everyone relied purely on their instincts to survive. Who would preach to who? Who would be able to learn whose supernatural powers? It was completely meaningless. Their gathering was to resolve a series of accumulated grievances in the past few hundred years. The demonic beasts were also intelligent. Although their system was basically built on bloodlines, they knew that some conflicts could not be ignored. They needed to be mediated and enlightened. Only then would they not cause internal strife among the demonic beasts. They did not have the ambition to dominate the universe. This was because even their ancestors, the immemorial sacred beasts, did not have such ambitions, let alone them. However, They could not possibly cause internal strife, right? Chapter 1477. Lu Xiaoyi could not be bothered with the trivial matters between demonic beasts. However, under 7th Yan's guidance, he recognized the origins of these demonic beasts. In the future, he would not be completely clueless when he traveled the universe. Among the species of demonic beasts, there is a very special existence called strange beasts. They are born from the heavens and earth. They are unique and cannot be replicated. They are also unable to reproduce and pass on. They are reclusive and kill easily. They think that the heavens and earth are spiritual and do not take demonic beasts seriously. When Yijun travels the universe in the future, he has to be careful of these things. Lu Xiaoyi had also heard of them before, but he had never seen them before. This was because these things were not something that human cultivators could raise. They are even stronger than ancient beasts. Although 7th Yan was somewhat indignant, he still knew his place. They are very powerful, because they come from the heavens. Among the ancient beasts, perhaps only phoenixes and rocks can be mentioned in the same breath. However, these things are at the peak and do not have much room for growth. They are also not compatible with the Great Tao. Therefore, in terms of threat, they are actually the creatures that the higher-ups are least worried about. The man and the wild goose were pointing at each other, but no one cared about them. The attention of the crowd of beasts was focused on the conflict below. Some of them were yelling, and some were waving their fists at each other. None of them were calm at all. However, the demonic beasts controlled the scale very well. No matter how explosive the situation was, they could finally achieve a result that everyone could accept. This was the hidden power of demonic beast culture. They had their own ways, and they were different from humans. Of course, humans also found it difficult to understand. Obviously, the fight between the green peacock and the roe deer owl was arranged to be the last. This was because it was a fight between species and because the green peacock had a special status. In Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, this roe deer owl group was not simple. The demonic beasts quarreled for about a month and finally settled most of the small disputes. When it was the turn of the green peacock and the roe deer owl who had been quiet all this time, an accident happened. A human cultivator appeared in the line of sight of the demonic beasts. What puzzled Lu Xiaoyi was that the demonic beasts did not seem to find this strange. Instead, they seemed to take it for granted. Looking at the cultivator with slightly dark skin, concave eyes, and a high nose, Lu Xiaoyi felt that he had seen him before. What's going on? Didn't they say that demonic beasts' internal problems should be solved internally? How did a human get involved in this? Lu Xiaoyi was not the only human at the scene of the gathering of beasts. Lu Xiaoyi had long been aware of this. Considering that the appearance of demon beasts in the human cultivation world was very common, the appearance of a race like humans who liked to stir up trouble everywhere was nothing new, just like him, Lu Xiaoyi. He was not the only one who liked to travel. The problem was that this person had openly appeared at the scene of the dispute. It was obvious that he wanted to join in the fray. This made him puzzled. 7th Yan sighed. It's a long story. The power behind this human is indeed related to the source of this conflict. This is something that all the demonic beasts know, so it's not strange for him to appear here. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at it, then looked at Wild Goose King and the rest of the people in the field. He understood that this group of honest wild geese was deliberately leading him into a trap. Of course, it was up to him whether he wanted to jump into the trap or not. No one forced him. However, this group of wild geese must have thought that he would jump into the trap. This was the purpose of this change of direction. Of course, there must be a coincidence in this. Maybe it was just a casual move by the wild geese, with the intention of bringing a guy over first.
How honest.
Not only were there no honest people in the cultivation world, but there were also no honest birds. Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi had shut up and stopped asking questions, 7th Yan had to continue talking. This was because the task given to it by its boss was to tell the whole story in full detail. As for the future, it would do as it saw fit. The roe owl is the inherited bloodline of Zhu Yan. A long, long time ago, An immortal once subdued a Zhuyan and went to the immortal realm. Even among the Archean beasts, this is a rare treatment. Therefore, the roe owl has a special status in this area of the beast territory. Lu Xiaoyi could roughly guess what it meant. Immortals liked to ride beasts, not because they were faster, but because it was a symbol of status. In terms of speed, how many monsters could be faster than immortals who could change the world? Of course, immortals wouldn't choose ordinary beasts to ride. Simply put, just like how beauties didn't want to wear the same clothes, immortals also didn't want to bump into beasts. Therefore, immortals' mounts, pet beasts, elixir pills, and all kinds of other beasts were mostly mutated beasts. Because they were unique, others couldn't bump into them. Among the Archean beasts, phoenixes and rocks were exceptions. Because of their arrogant personalities, they were unwilling even to become immortals' mounts. Moreover, these two beasts also had their own species that had independently become immortals. Therefore, their noble bloodlines weren't just for show. They really had the support of their ancestors. The other Archean beasts were different. Basically, there were no species that could independently become immortals. Immortals were more willing to choose mutated beasts to ascend to the immortal realm. Therefore, if an immortal took a fancy to a Zhuyan and brought it up to the immortal realm, it would be a great fortune. Moreover, it would also benefit the entire species. Even the Zhuyan's impure descendants, such as the roe owl, would benefit from it. In short, we have someone above us. Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi still didn't speak, Seventh Goose could only continue awkwardly. It also knew that its boss's intentions had been seen through. However, at this point, it didn't seem like there was any other way except to continue the introduction. They weren't all malicious. In the end, the humans still had to make the decision. Actually, the Great Goose Tribe knew that humans were supporting the roe owl, so they also brought someone back to see if he could be a match for them. This was a very hasty decision made by the old Great Goose King. What everyone didn't understand was why their boss was so sure that this guy could be a match for the human behind the roe owl. That immortal was born in the Hung River region. It's not far from our beast territory. Therefore, the roe owl tribe and the cultivators of the Hung River region have always been in contact with each other. A few hundred years ago, the roe owl tribe used this region to exchange for a green peacock treasure. They probably used it in the Hung River region, but the results weren't satisfactory. Now, they're here to settle the score. They're either exchanging the region or exchanging for a treasure. The roe owl tribe might not have much intention in this. I'm afraid that they were mostly instructed by humans. The green peacock was unwilling to lower its head. It thought that it was in the right, so it stuck here. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He didn't blame the Great Goose Tribe. However, it was very troublesome to be involved in such matters during a cultivation journey. He also didn't want to be too involved in these trivial matters of the universe. He had heard White Brows mention the Hung River region before. However, these people, they were born to be busy. Chapter 1478. What kind of place is the Hengi sector? Yan Qi heaved a sigh of relief. Since he was willing to talk, it meant there was a chance. They had been traveling together for many years and had a good relationship. It was not right to bring him here without telling him the truth. It was not the way of true friends. The Hengi sector is the closest human sector to the beast territory. I have never been there. I have only heard of its legends from people of the same race and close friends. It is a very strange sector. It is very powerful, but its orthodoxy is unknown. Some say it is the origin of Buddhism or a variant of Buddhism. However, there is a big difference in the doctrines. Buddhism talks about patience, and it talks about patience. However, Buddhism talks about equality, but the Hengi sector talks about law and karmic reincarnation. To put it simply, law referred to the norms of people's lives and actions. The so-called karmic reincarnation meant that if people lived according to the law given to them, their souls could be reincarnated to a higher level after death. The inequality in this world was predestined by the previous life. There are 3 main gods in the Hengi sector. This is completely different from Buddhism, and of course, it is even more different from Taoism. The legends about the Hengi sector are very vague. Unless you go there yourself, you will not be able to completely understand what kind of orthodoxy it is. Yan Qi's words were vague, but Lu Xiaoyi understood. The universe was big and full of strange things. If Taoism and Buddhism could appear in this cultivation world, then it was not strange for other forms of sects to appear here. The question was, what did they want to do? Were they content to stay in a corner, or did they want to gain something during the changing of the universe? What kind of role did they play in this time's chaotic space war? Were they innocent? Were they unrelated? Or were they hiding deep within? Lu Xiaoyi did not think that the Buddhists of the main world had revealed all their trump cards this time. In fact, they had tested the strength of the fifth ring, but their true strength was unfathomable. There must be some forces that had not appeared in the eyes of the universe's cultivation world. The White Brow had once mentioned the Hengi realm to him. It was one of the few realms in the universe that could be compared to the fifth ring Zhou Xian, including the Anchor Chain realm, the Radiant realm, and the Sunken realm. One of them was the Hengi realm, which showed that its strength could not be underestimated. It was just that it had always kept a low profile, so low profile that no one really knew about it. Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to understand it either. It wasn't easy for him to get rid of his inner demon, so there was no reason for him to fall back into it. Thus, he decided to use his sword to solve the problem if possible, asking what was right and wrong. Kill it if you don't like it. This should be the attitude of a swordsman. The great swan geese were indeed very good. They had successfully hooked his interest because he really did not like this realm. This came from some memories of his previous life. Since he was here, and with the great swan geese adding fuel to the fire, he only needed to appear more bloodthirsty. He knew very well that if this was really the orthodoxy that he knew in his previous life, there was no need to interact with them at all. He would just keep beating them up. He looked at Seven Wild Goose and said, "Seriously, I've always treated the great swan geese as friends. But I didn't expect you to use me as a weapon. There's no need to talk about the past. Tell me directly, what do you want me to do? If you keep telling me half the truth from now on, then I don't want to be your friend anymore." Seven Wild Goose was shocked. He knew that what he was going to say next might forever change their relationship with this human, and it might even change their relationship with the orthodoxy behind him. The reason why the great swan geese kept Seven Wild Goose here was not only because he wanted to take care of Seven Wild Goose's youth, but more importantly, Seven Wild Goose's position in the great swan geese tribe meant that he had the right to make decisions. In an instant, Seven Wild Goose made up his mind. He decided to tell the truth. This depended on his understanding of this Taoist over the past few years. If he continued to lie, he was afraid that he would lose more than he gained. Jun, I would like to express my sincere apologies for scheming against you. This was not the original intention of our friendship, nor was it a scheme from the beginning. Please believe me, when we first met, we didn't have any other intentions, and we really treated you as a friend. It was only when we learned that the green peacock and the roe owl were going to confront each other in the beast gathering that we had this idea on the spur of the moment. We didn't want to force you, so we kept you here to let you make your own decision. Whether you're willing to help or not, the decision lies with you, not with us. Seeing that the human Taoist did not refute, Seven Wild Goose continued, "Why do we want to bring a human cultivator with us? There are many reasons. Actually, we don't really understand why the great swan geese trusts you so much. It's because, in our opinion, the cultivators of the Hung River boundary are not to be trifled with. Their strength is not something that can be represented by a low-profile reputation. Normal human cultivators can't control them. The Hung River boundary cultivators are behind the roe owl. This is not a secret in the beast gathering territory. Everyone knows. The roe owl even helped the people of the Hung River boundary rope in other beast clans, but most of them didn't agree. The Green Peacock clan's treasure that the roe owl exchanged for has long been rumored to not be very useful in the Hung River boundary. It doesn't live up to its name. Actually, the Green Peacock clan, and we both know that this is just an excuse. To our two clans, reputation is more important than anything else. We definitely won't use shoddy goods as good ones and exaggerate the treasure. If they say it's not useful, it's either they used it improperly or they have other intentions. As for the Roe Owl clan coming to settle the score, we have long expected it, but we don't know when they will make trouble. The great swan geese once reminded the green peacock clan that if the Roe Owl makes trouble, it's very likely that the cultivators of the Hung River boundary will support it from behind. Therefore, we should also find a human to support us. But as you know, the peacock clan is too arrogant, to the point of being stubborn. They don't think that they have lost anything, so they don't bother to form factions. In the end, they ended up like this, facing enemies all alone. This is also the result of being too inflexible. We only learned about the beast gathering 3 years after we met you, great swan geese. As the only ally of the green peacock clan, it's only right for us to come and support you. Because you happen to be in the group, everyone said to pull you along as well.
Just treat it as a sightseeing.
Maybe you can come in handy? Of course, the final decision will always be in your hands, great swan geese. If you help the peacock clan, we can't thank you enough. If you choose not to help because of other reasons, we will still be friends. After all, in the cultivation world, this kind of dispute will involve karma. Not only oneself, but also the sect behind you. So, I stayed here to explain to you. I want to see if you are willing to help the green peacock clan in this kind of situation. Great swan geese will be honest. First, it depends on your wish. Second, it depends on your strength. If you feel that you have no problem, then we can think of a solution in this regard. If you are unwilling, or feel that your strength is limited, it's human nature not to stand out. You don't have to bear too much burden. Chapter 1479. How can I help? Everyone knows that the Hung River sect cultivator is one of the main characters of this incident, but I don't have any relationship with the green peacock race. Do you think they will let a complete stranger like me get involved? Lu Xiaoyi didn't give up. He still needed to see clearly. Once he started helping, it might be a dead knot that could never be untied. Seventh Yen thought that he could rely on himself or the power behind him to help the peacock race get through this, but they didn't understand Lu Xiaoyi. From Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, the best way to negotiate was to send the opponent to hell. After drinking Grandma Meng's soup, everyone could still be friends. Seventh Yen wasn't at the scene, so he couldn't make up his mind. Let's see how Seventh Yen and the rest negotiate. In the space of the beast territory, the green peacock race's abilities are unique. They have a kind of pressure that can subdue most of the beasts here other than the great geese race, including the Roe Owl race. That's why I think the Roe Owl race won't appear. We'll use the most ancient battle in the beast territory to settle this. I'm afraid that the Hung River sect cultivator will make a move. Their martial arts are very evil, they are neither Buddhist nor Taoist, and the pressure of the peacock is useless against you humans. Seventh Yen, you just need to wait. If boss and the rest have an idea, they will inform you and see how we can participate. Both sides had already made a decision. Reconciliation was impossible. The Roe Owl race had come with a purpose, and the green peacock race was arrogant and cold. Other than using the traditional method of the beast territory, there was no other way. This was the world of the demonic beasts, and they firmly believed that the strong were the kings. This was their tradition, and humans had to follow all of this. Borzol faced a group of feathered beasts and spoke leisurely. The noble peacock feather is a legendary treasure. Although it can't be compared to the peacock plume, it has a special effect in supporting, transforming, and storing one's fate. This is a legend that has been passed down for countless years in the beast territory. Unfortunately, it's not acclimatized in the Hung River realm. In the Hung River realm, the peacock feather can't be controlled, and the transportation is messed up, causing the stored fate to disappear. There are many mistakes when using it, but the actual effect is completely different from the legends. I wonder how the peacock race will explain this. Does the treasure have to be used in the place where it's used? He took out a feather. It was the peacock feather that the Roe Owl had exchanged for hundreds of years ago. The treasure is not damaged, and it belongs to your clan. You should know if my Eternal River realm has tampered with it. If you don't believe me, you can send someone to follow me back to the Ganges River to see the effects of this feather. The leader of the Green Peacock's party was Kong Shi, who was in the Sun Spirit realm. He glanced at this human indifferently and didn't bother to explain. If he was deliberately looking for trouble, this kind of thing couldn't be explained clearly. There's no need. Tell me where you came from. Why go around in circles and waste everyone's time? Bowazo smiled. He had long heard of the green peacock's temper. It was a proud beast that could be bullied. In the eyes of humans, these so-called noble beasts were not difficult to deal with. If they had a reputation to protect, they would have a weakness that could be exploited. Historically, Hung River and the Beast Territory have been friendly neighbors for millions of years. They shouldn't be fighting over such a small matter. However, this airspace is where the roe owl lives. It's not good for Dafa to give it away. There has to be a result that both sides can live with. How about this? For the sake of our friendship, your peacock clan can propose a solution and see if there's any room for negotiation. Kong Shi raised his eyebrows. What solution? There's no solution. 500 years ago, when you came to ask for the peacock feather, I told you clearly that the use of the peacock feather depends on the occasion. There's no such thing as an omnipotent treasure in this world. I advise you to be careful. You must have persisted at that time until today's matter. Since fellow Taoist has asked, I'll say the Green Peacock clan's attitude again. This is a separate matter. The previous transaction has been completed and the peacock feather has been verified. It's in line with the contract, so it's permanent. Today's request, whether it's to return this airspace or to exchange for a new treasure, is a different transaction. My peacock clan has the right to refuse. If you want to use force, I'd like to see how big of a wave you, a Hung River cultivator, can make in the beast territory. Bohal smiled. The peacock clan's reaction was within his expectations. Although he was only at the primordial soul realm, he knew that the green peacocks couldn't do anything to him, even though he wasn't completely fearless here. This was the propriety of the demonic beasts when interacting with humans. If it was someone with no background, he could kill them. However, they had been neighbors for hundreds of thousands of years and were wary of each other. There was also a group of demonic beasts standing on the side of Hung River. So, what could the sun god peacock do to him? Of course, he couldn't appear too overbearing. He had a purpose for coming here this time. He wanted to bring one or several green peacocks back to the Hung River realm and use the green peacock's power to control the peacock feather. This was the reason why the peacock feather wasn't very effective in the Hung River realm. How about this? Since no one is willing to give in, it doesn't seem appropriate for anyone to compromise. Then, let's follow the rules of the beast territory and see who has the ability to decide the direction. Seeing the green peacocks looking at each other coldly, Bohal threw out his plan. Fighting and killing is not what I want. I think it's also not what the Peacock clan and the Roe Owl clan want. However, if we make a mistake, the consequences will be unpredictable. It will have a huge impact on the interactions between the Hung River realm and the Hung River realm. Do you all agree with what I said? Many demonic beasts nodded in agreement. The internal strife between the demonic beasts was still fine, but now that the Roe Owl clan obviously didn't dare to take the field, the Hung River realm cultivators had taken the responsibility and turned it into a contest between the Hung River realm cultivators and the Peacock clan. This situation was a little precarious. The universe was in chaos, the Great Tao was collapsing, and chaos was everywhere. The demonic beasts didn't want to get themselves involved in this kind of chaos, so they were especially careful when dealing with humans. They were afraid that they would fall into a pit if they didn't pay attention and get involved in the so-called general trend of the universe. Therefore, regardless of whether they stood on the Roe Owl clan side or neutral, they all agreed with the Hung River realm cultivators. The peacocks were also helpless. They knew that this was a sign that the Hung River realm cultivators were about to do something evil. However, since they were in the beast territory, they couldn't go against all the demonic beasts. Moreover, they always believed that strength was everything. With the 3 young soul stage peacocks in the Peacock clan, no matter what kind of bet they made, how could they be afraid of a small human primordial soul stage cultivator? It was a fact that human cultivators were stronger than demonic beasts in the same realm. However, this didn't include the 2 most special species, the peacocks and the swan geese. They had a noble bloodline and outstanding abilities. Compared to human cultivators in the same realm, they weren't at a disadvantage. Moreover, they were suppressing their realm, so what was there to worry about? Chapter 1480. Bohal waved his sleeves, and a long scroll of silk appeared in the air. I have a painting called the Eternal River Painting. It's also a treasure of the Hung River realm. It's a collection of post-celestial spirit treasures, and it's the mother river of the Hung River realm. This painting is made in the shape of the Hung River and carries the spiritual sustenance of the people of Hung River. It's vast and mighty. Just like life, it's eternal. We, the people of Hung River, whether we're cultivators or mortals, must bathe in it whenever there's a major event in our lives. Every strand of our spirit is entrusted to the Eternal River Painting.
He looked at the peacock tribe.
You have the sun god Great Demon. To be honest, I can't compare. But the wonders of cultivation don't necessarily lie in bloody battles. I'm willing to throw my spirit into the Eternal River Painting with the 3 seniors of the peacock tribe. We'll go against the flow and compete in speed. Whoever crosses the entire river first will be the winner. This competition will not only not fail because of fighting, but also fully tests the strength of each person's spirit. I'm very familiar with this painting, and the 3 grand monarchs have a higher realm than me. It's not like anyone has the advantage. Do the 3 of you dare to accept such a competition? This kind of gambling competition usually occurred with cultivators of a higher realm. There were countless disputes in the cultivation world, and there were always many conflicts that needed to be resolved. You couldn't always have disputes with cultivators of the same realm, and it was even more impossible for everyone to be like Lu Xiaoyi, who had the ability to kill those of a higher realm. So usually, the party with a lower realm would offer a method that they thought was advantageous to them and see if the other party would accept it. To accept or not to accept? That was the question. Was the lower realm cultivator more familiar with their method? Or was the higher realm cultivator more confident in their own strength? That was a matter of opinion. But under normal circumstances, the higher realm cultivators who thought highly of themselves wouldn't reject such a method. Because of their personality, because of their fearlessness, and even more so because of their confidence in their strength. Especially for the Peacock clan, how could they possibly shrink back? From this point, the Hung River realm cultivators were already prepared. They didn't have to worry about the Hung River realm cultivators playing tricks. How could the sun god's spirit be so easily schemed against?
There were so many spectators around.
For a demon beast with a more straightforward personality, trying to kill someone in this kind of situation was basically cutting off their own path of retreat. Not only would Bowazo die for sure, the beast territory would also forever be at odds with the Hengi realm, not to mention the crazy revenge of the peacock race in the future. This was only a branch of the peacock. It was far from being the entire peacock. For the sake of reassuring everyone, Bohal added another layer of insurance by spreading the river of long curls into the air. The diagram of the Eternal River has its own spirit. For the sake of fairness, I am willing to remove the spirit seal and only display the pure diagram of the Eternal River. Isn't this very sincere? Kongshi raised her eyebrows and spat out a few words. No need. A mere curled spirit can't control us. The green peacocks wanted to show that they didn't care, but Bohal wanted to show that he was selfless. Before I came here, an elder said that in this competition, our Hengi field felt like we were bullying others. Therefore, if we display this map, we must not allow Wanling to control it. This is an apology, and also a show of sincerity. If I fail, the peacock feather will be returned to me in its original form, and the sky region will no longer be in conflict with you. This will be an eternal example. If I succeed, I ask the peacock race to send one or more fellow Taoists to the Hengi field to help display the power of the peacock feather. The sky region will still belong to the peacock race. This condition, this bet, can be considered very sincere? It was obvious that the people of Hengi Field really wanted the peacock race to send someone to the Hengi Field. As for why, was it really to control the peacock feather, or did they have other motives? No one could say for sure. The peacock race rarely entered the human domain alone. They were very social and were even more wary of humans. Because of their noble bloodline, they were always on guard against cultivators with ulterior motives. But this time, the cultivators of Hengi Field were very Dafa and did not hide their intentions. In other words, it might not be as bad as they thought. The three young spirit peacocks' divine senses converged, and they all had the inclination to agree. They also didn't want to be too stiff with the Hengi Field because of this. The fear was mutual. The people of Hengi Field were afraid of the entire peacock race, and they, the green peacocks, were only one of them. The Hengi Field was close at hand, and their strength was unfathomable. Yanjun interrupted at the right time. Fellow Taoists, can you listen to me? The relationship between them had been tested for a long time, and they were also the only true friends of the peacock race in this beast territory. Although they didn't agree on many ideas, they were willing to listen to their friends' opinions at critical moments. It's not appropriate for all three of you to go in. There is a saying among humans, don't put all your eggs in a basket. Although I also think that the map of the Eternal River has no problem, it doesn't mean that I will put the highest combat power of the whole race into it. At least one of you should stay outside. Yanjun's reminder was very timely, and it also showed his experience. There was a deep meaning in this saying, don't have the heart to harm others, but don't lose the heart to guard against others. The three young spirit peacocks talked for a while, and decided to leave one outside and two inside. They felt that since the cultivator of Hengi Field was so Dafa, it was not safe for only one young spirit to go in. If there was an oversight, it would be too late to regret it. Yanjun sighed. In fact, he hoped that only one young spirit peacock would go in, but this was probably the biggest concession the peacock race could make, so he couldn't ask for too much. Everyone stood from a different point of view, and the way they saw the problem was also different. He hoped that his allies would be safe and sound, but the young spirits peacocks didn't want to lose face, so they had to win. I know a human friend. Coincidentally, during this period of time, he is a guest of our Swan Goose clan. I think that since the cultivator of Hengi Field is so generous to allow the three peacocks to enter the scroll of the Eternal River, he must be very confident, and this confidence even exceeds the limit of the realm. Forgive me for being rude, but I'm afraid that only the Great Goose Race will talk to you like this. For safety's sake, there is no need for three peacocks to go in. You two young spirits are already there, so why add a little peacock? It's meaningless. It's better to let a human go in. I promise that this person's strength is very good, and he can be the last safeguard. The three peacocks looked at each other, and their attitudes were quite uniform.
Kong, she refused.
We will never forget the friendship between the Great Goose Race and our peacock race, so no matter what you say, we know that it is a kind reminder. But we won't accept the help of a strange human. This is the principle of the green peacock race, and it has never changed. Yanjun sighed again. He had expected this. After getting along with each other for tens of thousands of years, how could he not know each other's temperament? In this case, I will use a right-left by our ancestors, the Great Rock and the Phoenix. When we have different views on the matter, any race has the right to ask for their own suggestions to be respected.
No one can monopolize it.
The three candidates are led by your peacock race, so you can choose two, and the remaining one, according to the rules left by our ancestors, the Great Goose Race is qualified to choose. Chapter 1481. Kong Shi was speechless. They had thought that it would be acceptable if the Great Goose Race sent one goose to join the three candidates. After all, everyone in the beast territory knew that the two races were allies. If that was the case, they would not reject it. It was a kind gesture. Besides, the Great Goose and the Peacock race had different abilities. They complemented each other and could increase the success rate. But what about the humans? Did they need the help of humans? In the end, what was supposed to be a problem of the beast territory would turn into a fight between humans. Humans were everywhere. They were even more ubiquitous than Zerg. The agreement mentioned by Lord Yanjun did exist. Its actual meaning was that the two tribes should be united, instead of one tribe acting arbitrarily. Yanjun's request was reasonable. According to the ancient agreement, the peacock would choose 2 candidates and the great goose would choose 1. This was the best interpretation of the ancient agreement. However, Kong Shi reminded, even if we agree, the Ganges people might not agree. After all, even though he was involved as a human being and had a lot to do with this matter, what was up with this human being that you found? What is his connection? If he is just a friend of the Great Goose Race, it will be a little difficult. If he rejects, most of the demons will support him. Yanjun still insisted, let's try. Who knows? We have to try our best. If this is the will of the heavens, then there is nothing to say. It sent out a divine sense invitation. Thus, under the gazes of countless demonic beasts, another human entered the scene of confrontation. Some of the older and more experienced demonic beasts sighed one after another. What the F***CK? Why are there human shit-stirrers everywhere? Looking at this sloppy human Taoist, a bad premonition arose in Behizuo's heart. Who were the most feared by humans in the cultivation universe? It was not the so-called powerful, terrifying, bloody, or strange races. They were most afraid of their own kind. Although he looked inconspicuous and his aura was limited, he was only a Yin master. However, the shit-stirring ability of humans had little to do with their realms. This was their instinct. Everyone was good at it. Everyone was born with it. Stirring up the world, the universe, the present, and the future. How should I address you, Taoist friend? Where did you come from? Where are you from? Why did you appear so suddenly? Lu Xiaoyi was all smiles. Come from where you came from. Come from where you came from. What's your intention? Nothing much, just looking around and stirring things up. When you get married, I'll go first. When you take a dump, I'll block your eyes. He was a universal cultivator, hooligan. That was not the judgment of Hexazol. Cultivators like this were everywhere in the universe, and they took pride in ruining people's good deeds. However, he wouldn't underestimate this person's abilities because of this. Anyone who dared to wander around the beast territory alone was definitely not a good person. Therefore, the best way was to reject his participation. He wasn't that Dafa. It didn't matter if one person came. What he wanted was a success rate. Even if the 3 people who came in were all peacock young gods, he was sure that he would win. But with a human god, there were variables. If you want to enter the Eternal River Scroll, you must have karma with this matter. You're either a member of the Peacock clan or an ally of the Peacock clan. Which one are you, fellow Taoist? Lu Xiaoyi scratched his head. I am Peacock's ally. Bohal looked at Kong Shi. This person says he is Peacock's ally. Then, you must know where he came from? Kong Shi was slightly embarrassed. She really couldn't stand Hong Yan's helplessness. It was a clear matter, but he had to make a fool of himself. In the end, he was even mocked by others. My Green Peacock clan doesn't know this person. We also don't know where he came from. Maybe he's a wanderer who came here to make his presence known? She turned to Lu Xiaoyi.
Hey.
Why aren't you leaving? There are countless great demons here. If you annoy everyone and waste everyone's time, you'll be in trouble. Do you really think this is the human's airspace and you can do whatever you want?
She still had sympathy for him.
She knew that he was a friend of the Great Goose tribe. Now, she was taking the opportunity to find a way out for him so that he could leave quickly. Otherwise, there were already some impatient demonic beasts in the surroundings. If things really got chaotic, the few members of the Great Goose tribe might not be able to protect him. Many demons in the surrounding space were jeering and howling. Clearly, they were extremely dissatisfied with him wasting time here. They were all impatient and wanted to see the result. Who would be willing to see a clown like him? Yanjun was a little embarrassed, but he didn't know what to say. He was in a good mood, but his plan wasn't very thorough. It was too rushed. Lu Xiaoyi glared at him. Clearly, he was very dissatisfied with his ability. It was just a matter of qualifications, but he still had to do it himself. He really didn't know how this descendant of the Great Peng managed to survive. He slapped his forehead. Aya, look at my brain, it's a little messed up after being kicked by Hong Yan. Yes, I am indeed not an ally of Peacock Clan. I am actually a relative of Peacock Clan. Relative, this karma should be enough, right? Relative? The demons in the surroundings all laughed. This was even more unreliable than an ally. Everyone knew that Peacock Clan kept themselves clean and never fooled around with other creatures. In the millions of years of the beast territory, they really hadn't heard of any Peacock Clan relatives from other clans. How is this possible? A few Peacock young deities looked unhappy. They were about to open their mouths and turn hostile, but they were stopped by Yanjun. He had heard this Taoist boast that he knew the Smoky Peacock clan. Although he didn't believe that there would be a smoky peacock who would take a fancy to him and give him its blood, he could only take a gamble this time. Smoky peacocks, although in terms of status, were illegitimate children. They were the illegitimate children of the Phoenix. Their bloodlines were even more superior than the other 4 peacock clans. Bohizuo laughed. What a clown. He dared to say anything. He didn't know what would happen to other demon clans, but if they could prove that he was lying, the Peacock clan wouldn't let him go. Therefore, he added fuel to the fire. Good. We cultivators believe in solid evidence the most. We never make baseless assumptions. How about this? When this feather was used, other biological orthodoxies, including humans, would only be able to unleash the 5-colored light. Only the peacocks themselves would be able to unleash the 7-colored light, thus fully unleashing the power of this treasure. Since you say that you are a relative of the Peacock clan, then I won't ask too much of you. As long as you can use this feather and release 6 rays of light, I will admit that you are a relative of the Peacock clan and allow you to participate. Why do you dare to give it a try? He was confident because in the hundreds of years in the Eternal River Realm, who knew how many powerful experts had used this peacock feather? Regardless of the realm, Yin deity, primordial spirit, yang deity, they could only release 5 rays of light. This was the strange thing about the peacock feather. It had nothing to do with the realm. Therefore, he wasn't worried that this Taoist would use some kind of special ability to release more rays of light. This was the uniqueness of the most noble bloodline of demon beasts. No one could change it. Chapter 1482. In the eyes of all the beasts, this was the last chance to leave. If they admitted their mistake, they would take advantage of the fact that everyone was still watching the show and quickly run away. Otherwise, it would be impossible to escape even if they grew wings. But this human was really courting death. He laughed and stretched out his hand to grab the peacock feather. This human was dead. He was still unaware. Finally, he grabbed the peacock feather, and a luster flashed. This was due to the mysterious power of the cultivator. For other beasts, including humans, it could release 5 rays of brilliance, each with their own wonderful uses. Therefore, it was not strange that there was a flash of brilliance at the beginning. Even if a pig went up, it would be able to get 5 of them. 1 ray, 2 rays. Lu Xiaoyi was not in a hurry, but in fact, he was far from being as calm as he appeared. This was because this peacock feather treasure was very strange. It seemed that the number of rays of brilliance produced was not up to him. 3, 4, 5 rays should be the limit. This was the consensus of all the beasts and humans present. Then, naturally, the 6th ray of brilliance appeared. It's really a relative. I wonder what kind of relative it is? Some beasts cried out in surprise. Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. Son-in-law, the kind that marries into the family. Everyone's surprise did not stop because after the 6th ray of brilliance appeared, a 7th ray of brilliance appeared. This time, even all the Peacock clansmen were dumbfounded. How was this possible? If there was really an Azure Peacock who became Tao companions with this person, there would be 1 less ray of brilliance. If there were 6 rays, how could there be 7 rays like the Peacock clan? Several Peacock young gods immediately realized a problem. This son-in-law was definitely not from the Azure Peacock clan. He was not even from the Yellow Peacock, Purple Peacock, or White Peacock clansmen. He could only be from the Red Peacock or Smoke Peacock clansmen with the noblest bloodlines. The Peacock bloodline could only be passed on to 1 person in a lifetime. The person who received it would possess abilities that were slightly inferior to the Peacock bloodline. For example, among the 5 peacock clans, the peacock clans of the green, yellow, purple, and white peacock clans could only emit 7 rays of light. Correspondingly, their son-in-law, that is, their Taoist companions who were not of the peacock clan, could borrow the power of the peacock clans to emit 6 rays of light. The number of rays would decrease by 1. This was the rule. Those completely unrelated people, if they were authorized by the peacock, could also activate the peacock feather, but the brilliance emitted would be 1 less ray. This was the reason why Behizo could only emit 5 rays no matter who it was in the Eternal River realm, for hundreds of years. This was also the reason why they had to invite a peacock. Only a real peacock would be able to unleash the full power of the peacock's feathers. The 7 rays of light could wipe out everything. But among them, the red and smoke peacocks who were directly under the phoenix were different. Because their bloodlines were more noble and their abilities were more powerful, the peacocks of these 2 clans could actually emit 8 rays of light. Don't underestimate the extra ray. It meant the difference in their abilities. As for the existence that could emit 9 rays of light, other than the phoenix itself, there was no one else. This was already a concept that did not belong to the mortal world. These things were the secrets of the peacock clan. Outsiders did not know at all. According to this logic, the 6 rays of brilliance produced by this Taoist were not too shocking, because he might have had an affair with some peacock tribesman. Whether it was by cheating, or willingly using force, once he was infected, he was infected. But now that he had emitted 7 rays of light, according to the principle of decreasing, it meant that his Taoist companions could only be from the red and smoke clans. This identity was not ordinary. If he said that he was qualified to participate in this gambling fight, then it was justified. It was equivalent to the eldest cousin of the main branch of the distant main branch coming to help. What was the problem? This eldest cousin also knew that something was wrong in his own heart, so he put in a lot of effort to pretend. He originally wanted to show his face, and now he did, but there was a tendency to spread to the whole body. How would he know how many rays of light he could emit? His eldest cousin was an idiot. He did not understand the main branch at all. This was also the first time he came into contact with the peacock feather, but although he was a little stunned, he still had a basic intuition. He knew that if this ray of light continued to emit, it might cause some unnecessary trouble and misunderstandings, so in the process of emitting the rays of light, he desperately looked for a way to control it. In terms of the number, it was enough. He could not continue to emit more. Although in his previous life, he was a spammer, brushing up favorability, brushing up the list, but that was just a spammer. Now that he was emitting real light, it would cause misunderstandings. Fortunately, he still had the ability, it was just that he had never used it before, so he was a little rusty. From the first ray of light to the 7th ray, he had basically mastered the method of controlling it. Finally, when the 8th ray of light was slightly exposed, he cut it off. But such a small change could deceive all the other demonic beasts present. It could deceive humans. It could deceive little peacocks whose realm was not high, but it could not deceive the 3 young spirit peacocks. They knew very well that this Taoist was deliberately controlling it, so the 8th ray of light was not emitted, but it did not mean that he did not have the ability to emit the 8th ray of light. According to the principle of decreasing, being able to emit the 8th ray of light meant that his Taoist companion could emit the 9th ray. This meant that his Taoist companion was not eldest cousin. It was his king father-in-law. Mr. Liu stopped his favorite spammer and said complacently, "Am I considered a relative of a peacock?" The 3 young spirit peacocks nodded solemnly and bowed together. Although he was not old and was not worth mentioning to their peacock clan, they could not stand up to his seniority. It was equivalent to this person accidentally marrying your great-grandmother, and this matter was really troublesome. Bowazo was also very helpless. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he could not change what he had said. He really could not understand which peacock was blind enough to take a fancy to such a plaything. There were countless cultivators in the Eternal River realm, and geniuses came forth in large numbers. It had been a neighbor of the beast territory for hundreds of thousands of years, but not a single cultivator had such an opportunity. This person, at a glance, looked like a snake with a crooked nose and slanted eyes. His appearance was like a mirror, and he was definitely not a good person. He still did not know what kind of despicable methods he used. Later, he would have to quietly remind the peacocks not to fall for this evil trick. Of course, he did not know that such a reminder was destined to be useless in sowing discord. To the young spirit peacocks, if this Taoist could only emit 6 rays of light, then they would have to carefully investigate his origins. He might have used some unspeakable method, but now he could emit 8 rays. Anyone could be fooled, but would the supreme existence of the Phoenix bloodline be fooled? They were all existences that had been reborn from the ashes. Investigate? Would they dare to investigate? Was it normal for a great-grandson to investigate his great-grandmother's life? Was it not chaotic? Lu Xiaoyi naturally obtained the qualifications to participate in the gamble, and Yan Jun shook its head at the side. This guy, he was not bragging. Chapter 1483. The Long Scroll of the Eternal River, a lifetime of experience, overturned common sense, never to be seen again. The format of the battle was to enter from one end of the Eternal River and then swim out from the other end of the river. If it were a real river in the Eternal River realm, such a bet would be a joke. A river would not pose any obstacle to cultivators. However, this was the scroll of the Eternal River. It was a condensed acquired spiritual treasure that was based on the Eternal River. It was a sample taken from the real world and perfectly replicated. The entire scroll was filled with pure eternal river water essence, including the spiritual sustenance of the people of the Eternal River, who had been connected to the Eternal River for hundreds of thousands of years and regarded it as their mother river. The long scroll of the Eternal River was no longer just a river, but everything to the people of the Eternal River. It was the origin of life, and also the end of life. Regarding this point, although the 2 peacocks had a long lifespan, they had never been to the Eternal River realm, so they did not know what this river meant to them, who had always been obsessed with cleanliness. However, Lu Jingfu had already predicted this. It was their spiritual bodies that entered the long scroll of the Eternal River. It was not necessary to do so. In fact, the real body of a real person could also enter, but if the real person entered, the spirit of the Eternal River could not be removed. This was because the power of the scroll alone could not contain the surging mana of the Yang gods. Only when the spiritual bodies entered and were compatible with the essence of the long scroll of the Eternal River could the spirit be removed. Only then could the 4 spiritual bodies compete in the most fair way in the pure long scroll of the Eternal River. Due to the fact that they were only using their spiritual bodies, they were unable to use some of the spells they knew in the real world. They could only compete in terms of purity, depth, comprehension, and Tao realm. Most of the time, they would be using a more abstract method to carry out the duel. For example, the peacock's powerful body and Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword could not be used here. It was the main reason why Behizuo was confident that he could beat them. The Eternal River was not an ordinary river. If you were to compare it with the rivers of other realms, you would be gravely mistaken. This was something that the 3 challengers would eventually understand. Amidst the cheers, the 4 participants each sat down, their own spirits leaving their bodies and leaping into the long scroll of the Eternal River. Before they returned, their bodies were the most vulnerable targets. Of course, there was no such risk here. There were thousands of demonic beasts around. Bohizo's body was protected by dozens of roe deer owls. The 2 peacocks and Lu Xiaoyi's body were surrounded by hundreds of green peacocks and geese. What a joke! How could anything happen to the body of the ancestors' fresh meat? The 4 Een spirits entered from the source of the Eternal River. At the start, there was nothing special about it. This was an incomparably tall, snowy mountain range, majestic, stretching for thousands of miles. Pure and cool snow water gradually gathered from the various snowy mountains, forming a trickle, a stream, a river, and a river. This process was the same as the formation of rivers in other realms. It was the law of nature. As the water gathered and flowed forward, it flowed with other rivers and lakes, finally flowing into the sea. Under the influence of the climate, wind rose and rain fell, forming a closed cycle. It wasn't difficult for the Een god physique to move forward in such an environment. Although the water was gradually increasing, it wasn't enough to pose a real obstacle for a perfected lord's spiritual body. The real obstacle lay in other aspects. After leaving the beautiful, snowy mountain, after entering the densely populated areas, in the previous race, the two peacock Een spirits swam the fastest. Their spiritual bodies were the strongest, and the surging water did not affect them at all. The two human Een spirits followed behind them from a distance. Bohezuo knew what was going on and was not in a hurry. Lu Xiaoyi, on the other hand, was like a piece of sticky candy, following closely beside him. He did not stop spouting trash talk along the way. The mortals of the Eternal River realm have led such a tough life. Look at the houses on both sides of the river. None of them are good to look at. Speaking of which, is it so difficult to build a beautiful house and paint it new? It's like a pigsty. Look, the people who pull the stakes all end up in the river. Bohezuo had his reasons. What is the purpose of a person's life? Is it for the suffering of this life? Of course not. It is for the people above the people in the next life. In cultivation, in repentance, in order to be able to live a better life when reincarnated, to have a higher status. A house is just a temporary shelter from the wind and rain. What's the use of building it so well? It can't be taken away. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Then, what's the point of living in the Eternal River realm? Just throw them into the river and drown them when they're born. Save on food, and most importantly, save on excretion. Look, how is this a river? It's a smelly drain, a sewer, a big toilet for the entire Eternal River realm. Speaking of which, why are there so many people rushing here from so far away? Is it because it's more romantic to take a dump here? Bohezuo was very disdainful. The people of the Eternal River realm must bathe in the sacred river at least once in their lives. This is their belief. If they can't be born in the Eternal River, they must be buried in the Eternal River. This is the power of belief. You don't understand. It was shocking to see the riverbank from the river. There were dirty and dilapidated houses along the way, and all of them had big and small steps leading to the water. Most of the houses were cheap inns. Among the tenants, there were those who stayed for a day or two to bathe, and there were also those who stayed longer to wait for death. Those who were waiting for death had to bathe every day. Therefore, the house and the steps were crowded with people of all kinds, going in and out of them. Most of them couldn't even afford to stay in the inns, especially the old people who were waiting for death. Did they know when they would die? How could they have so much money to stay in the inns? They could only sleep on the riverbank, with piles of tattered luggage beside them. They wouldn't leave, because according to the customs here, they could be cremated for free if they died on the riverbank, and their ashes would be dumped into the Eternal River. If they left and died halfway, they would have no fate with the Eternal River. With so many people sleeping by the riverbank like ants waiting for death, how much excretion would there be every day? Thus, the entire riverbank stank. Some people of the Eternal River realm thought that if they died and their ashes were dumped into the Eternal River, they would definitely mix with other people's ashes, and it would be difficult for them to return to their original form in heaven. Thus, they pushed the whole corpses into the Eternal River and let them drift. The climate here was hot, and the result was obvious. At this moment, the sky was still dark and the temperature was still low. Countless people were soaking in the river. It was obvious that some people were shivering from the cold. The men were bare-chested and only wore a pair of shorts. There were people of all ages. Most of them were old people, either extremely fat or extremely thin, and rarely in between. The women wore veils, only middle-aged and old people. They dove into the water, their white hair tangling with the veils, and came out again after drinking 2 mouthfuls. No one was smiling, and no one was seen chatting. Everyone was silently soaking in the water and drinking it. There were countless middle-aged men and women squatting on the steps brushing their teeth, but no one used a toothbrush. They usually used their fingers or tree branches. After brushing, they swallowed the water and then cupped a few handfuls to drink. It was the opposite of the direction in which people of other realms spat out water when they were brushing their teeth. Chapter 1484. Humans should know the basics of what to do and what not to do. It was hard to find a dead elephant in the world because even elephants knew how to cover it up. Once again, they had to thank our Taoist ancestors for teaching the humans of the mainstream domains so much about don't, see no evil, hear no evil, move no evil, and do not do to others what you do not want to be done to you. Sometimes it seemed a little strict, but if there was no prohibition, how could there be civilization? If there was no fence, how could there be society? If there was no cover, how could there be shame? If there were no rules, how could there be order? By the eternal river, the two peacocks saw that the filth, ugliness, and death of humans could all be exposed in an exaggerated manner. They could all be released to others and nature without restraint. Because of the population explosion, this behavior was forming an unprecedented gathering. A huge number of people were rushing to the river day and night. The two peacock young gods were stunned. They could not imagine that there was such a place in the human world. The carrier of the Een spirit was the purest among the three stages of perfected monarchs and was easily contaminated. The primordial spirit was much more stable and sturdy when it left the body. Why did the Hengi domain choose a primordial spirit perfected monarch when they sent Bawazuo to carry out this mission? There was a deep reason for this. It could not be seen from the outside, but when they entered the eternal river, they immediately understood the intention. What was the most abundant in the eternal river? It was not the water essence or water essence, but the sustenance of people's spiritual souls. It could be imagined that with the size of a domain and the population of 10 billion, the number of souls in this river would be endless if almost every person's soul would be placed in this river after they died for hundreds of thousands of years. Although these souls were small, their numbers were huge. When they gathered together, they would form a heavy burden on the cultivator's spiritual soul. These souls liked strong and radiant sustenance the most, such as the yang spirit of a cultivator. When the two peacock yang gods entered the densely populated plains, they were like two pieces of smelly meat in the summer heat. All the flies in the surrounding area followed the smell and covered the sky. Next was the refined and pure Een spirit. The yang spirit was smelly meat, while the Een spirit here was a strange fragrance. Similarly, it attracted the love of the dead souls of the Hengi realm. They would rush up densely, and in the end, the Een spirit cultivator's Een spirit would swell to an unimaginable degree. It would be bloated and made it difficult for you to move. It would be hard for him to find his advantage in speed again. This was why the Hung River realm sent an essence divinity cultivator here. Here, the attraction of an essence divinity cultivator was the lowest. This was also the reason why Bohizo was not afraid of the two peacock young gods, nor was he afraid of this strange human god. He had nothing to fear. The eternal river is long. The further they swam, the more human souls of the Hung River covered their spiritual bodies. Here, in the long scroll of the eternal river, these human souls may be weak, but they will never die. There was no power that could completely destroy them. On the contrary, the more violent they were, the more they would attract the surrounding souls to cover them. It was a vicious cycle. Therefore, he was not in a hurry. Although the two peacock young gods were far ahead, this was just the beginning. Before they reached the middle section of the eternal river, they would be covered by the endless human souls of the Hung River. Their bodies would become bloated to a terrifying degree. It was like a ship that had been sailing in the ocean for a long time. Everywhere the bottom of the ship came into contact with the seawater, there would be a dense layer of sea creatures. The more time passed, the more the ship would lose its power. The heavier the draft, the more inconvenient the hull, and the slower it would turn. In the eternal river, there was no such thing as the bottom of the ship. The entire body was the hull, and as it moved forward, it would become thicker and thicker sea creatures. They would stick to the hull and become thicker and thicker, making it impossible for you to struggle and remove them. As for the foul-mouthed, vulgar, and refined scum next to him, it would not be long before he would no longer have the chance to be noisy by his side. He would be left far behind and entangled with those souls. Let's see if his rotten mouth could persuade the billions of souls to leave.
Perfect.
Outside the eternal river, thousands of demonic beasts were extremely bored. With their temperament and character, they preferred the kind of bloody and violent gambling fights. They were not interested in this kind of pure speed competition. Wherever there were humans, there would always be strange. From their point of view, they could clearly see the situation inside the scroll of eternity. This was done on purpose by Bowazo for the sake of fairness and transparency. He didn't want people to think that he was playing tricks inside the scroll of eternity. Therefore, he made every move public so that everyone could see through it. In the torrent of the eternal river, the two peacock young gods were far ahead, while the two humans were behind and entangled with each other. This was the situation of the gambling fight. Up to now, they had already swum 20% of the eternal river, and some abnormalities began to appear faintly. Why are the spiritual bodies of the two peacocks expanding? What's the reason? Yan Jun asked. He was very familiar with the supernatural powers of peacocks, but as a spiritual body, it was still impossible to know the real core of the peacock race. Therefore, he asked this question. The only remaining peacock young god, Kong Li, also frowned. This is not normal. Our peacock race has never used this kind of young god manipulation. It's harmful and not beneficial. There must be some special reason in the eternal river for the two sisters to act like this. It seems that they are resisting something. Yan Jun said seriously, from the point of view of the distance, there is no problem if we are far enough. But I don't know what will happen next. There must be something strange in the eternal river. Otherwise, the Hung River cultivator would not be so arrogant. Kong Li nodded. What is this human doing? He is inseparable from the Hung River cultivator? It can't be because of the same speed. It must be deliberate. So, is the Hung River cultivator doing it deliberately? Or is our relative doing it deliberately? Yan Jun, where did you find this human? You have known each other for tens of thousands of years. Your race is good at finding people. You can find a random person and have such a relationship. Yan Jun laughed dryly. Sisterly, this is not a random person. I am afraid that this is the first time in my tens of thousands of years of life. There will not be a second one in the future. This human is very special. The reason why I found him is not that he is really a relative of your peacock race. I thought this guy was bragging. It is because of other reasons that I can't explain to you at the moment. But you can rest assured that when it comes to the ability to make trouble, no one in the human world dares to say that they are the best. Just wait and see. I think the Hung River cultivator is going to be in trouble. Staying with such a scourge, isn't he digging his own grave? Calmly nodded and then shook her head. He was really good at making trouble. He even made trouble for the ancestors of the peacock race. Chapter 1485. Lu Xiaoyi was not idling around. He did not only spend his energy on trash talking. Such trash talk had long become second nature to him, and he did not need to think. Once he opened his mouth, it would come out without stopping. It was actually just a cover to cover his search for the secrets of the eternal river. He dressed himself up as a rogue cultivator who didn't know how to choose his words. What he wanted to hide was the truth of his technique. His understanding of the river was far above most people. It could be that his knowledge came from a certain time and space in his previous life, hence there were similarities. It was not entirely true to say that the river was unbearable. Any river in any human domain would have a beautiful section, but there would also be some sections that were extremely dirty. They could not be categorized as a whole because it would be unfair. Floating corpses could be found everywhere. However, in the eternal river, in the Hung River boundary, it was indeed the best place for a believer to die. This was also a fact. The rich and powerful could of course do it more gloriously and magnificently. However, for the commoners at the bottom, if they were still devout believers, they would really be waiting for their deaths by the river. Their wishes had been fulfilled. As for what would happen to the mother river after their deaths, who would care about that? In the Eternal River Scroll, there were 3 types of souls. The weakest kind were the believers. Their hearts were in the Holy River, but due to various reasons, They were unable to offer their bodies to the mother river. Their souls would eventually drift into the eternal river, becoming the weakest, but also the largest group of people. There was another type of believers. After they died and cremated, their ashes would be thrown into the eternal river. Hence, their souls were slightly stronger. There were many souls in this group. The most powerful souls were the zealots who threw themselves into the eternal river before their deaths. Their bodies were either devoured by the aquatic creatures in the eternal river before or after their deaths, so they became the most powerful souls. This was especially true for those who threw themselves into the river before their deaths. After experiencing great pain and suffering, their souls returned to the Western paradise, leaving behind the most powerful souls. Pain could stimulate the soul. It was said that this kind of self-burial was the closest to the teachings. It was the easiest way to rise to a higher level in the next life. Lu Xiaoyi's in spirit could feel countless souls pouncing on his body. However, he couldn't reject them. No matter what kind of spiritual power he used, he couldn't completely reject the approach of these human souls who were also spiritual entities. This allowed him to quickly understand Hung River cultivators' intentions. This was why he and this guy were inseparable and why they had to stick together. Since he couldn't use force, he needed to use smarter methods. Since the orthodoxy of the Hengi realm was also a part of Buddhism, no matter if it was a branch or the source, there would always be similarities. And he was a rare Taoist who was proficient in Buddhist techniques. This was where his advantage lay. He was trying to use all sorts of Tao realm powers to control these densely packed souls. Even if they were mortal souls, under the nourishment of the Mother River, they were indestructible existences. Just as he expected, all of the Tao realms were useless except for merit and impermanence. Lu Xiaoyi knew that he would never be able to compare to this cultivator in terms of knowledge of the Hung River system. Therefore, he shouldn't compete with him in terms of knowledge. He needed a smarter method. There was a time limit before he completely slowed down. He also knew that when using these souls, he couldn't rely on common sense and encourage the souls who were at the bottom of society. People like Chen Sheng and Wu Guang couldn't exist in such a religious system. The more the souls suffered in the previous life, the more fanatical they were, and the more they supported this system. This was because they had finished their suffering and were going to have a better life in the next life. It was a very strange way of thinking, but it was deeply ingrained. The reason why the two Peacock Yang gods became slower and slower in the Eternal River was that they didn't quite understand this basic principle that completely went against the trend of normal human thinking. Therefore, the more they struggled, the more souls surrounded them, and the slower they became. Lu Xiaoyi was also struggling, but his struggle was more targeted. He understood the strange nature of this Hung River system better. Why was it strong? What was its weakness? Because they were all spiritual entities, they still had the most basic communication with these mortal souls of the Hung River. Even if this communication was a bit messy, you couldn't imagine the pain when you faced trillions of voices. In this chaos, he discovered a very interesting phenomenon. The Eternal River, as the sacred river of the Hung River boundary, didn't have a single cultivator's soul. This was somewhat inconceivable. With this kind of orthodoxy, everyone was obsessed with their own religion. The cultivators should be the ones who benefited the most. It didn't make sense that after they died, they didn't come to the sacred river to stay. Not a single one. This wasn't normal. How could a river diagram without a cultivator's soul be refined into an acquired spiritual treasure? Because all living beings were equal? Because they valued ordinary mortals more? What a joke! How could these orthodox Taoist thoughts exist in an orthodoxy like the Hung River boundary? They were the most particular about social class. How could they be left out when there were benefits? There was only one reason. That Hung River boundary's Bohol purposely extracted the souls of the cultivators in the Eternal River. His method was very simple. People who didn't understand the Hung River boundary might not be able to understand it even if they thought about it for a lifetime. But to him, it was just extracting the Eternal River's soul. Yes, it must be like this. The eternal river's soul that Bohal extracted was actually the souls of all the cultivators in the sacred river. The two were the same thing. Then the question was, why did Bohal do this? What benefits did it have for him? Lu Xiaoyi felt that he had already come into contact with the edge of the truth. He was just a little bit away from finding out where this Hung River boundary cultivator's life gate was.
What could it be?
He quickly thought about all the inconceivable aspects of this orthodoxy. A thought flashed through his mind. This was a lowly cultivator. It couldn't be wrong. Only a lowly cultivator would be so wary of the eternal river's soul. Wary of the eternal river's soul's restriction on him. He had always found it strange. Even if it was to show his impartiality, very few cultivators were willing to extract the soul from their treasures. That meant that the treasures would lose all control and would only be able to operate by instinct. As time passed, who knew what kind of harm it would cause? Due to the time limit of this battle, Bohal wasn't too worried about losing control of the Eternal River Scroll. Thus, he borrowed the authority of his sect to extract the Eternal River's soul so that he could move freely in the Eternal River. Such a strange action would be inconceivable in other realms, but in a place like the Hung River boundary, it was completely possible. Cultivators with high surnames and low realms had a higher status than those with low surnames and high realms. With this judgment, he had a direction to take. Lu Xiaoyi revealed a mischievous smile. In the Eternal River, it wasn't only the souls of cultivators that were divided into different levels. Even the souls of ordinary people were divided into different levels. Chapter 1486. Lu Xiaoyi used his virtuous Dao realm to secretly spread this news. To the souls in the Eternal River, whether or not they were cultivators' souls was very important. The souls of ordinary cultivators were very picky about who could control the Eternal River Scroll. This type of pickiness was not based on the level of cultivation, but on the social class one was born into. To put it bluntly, the family you were born into would forever determine your social status. Even if you were very capable, very rich, and could cultivate, you still couldn't escape from this vicious cycle of discrimination. The souls left behind in the sacred river after a cultivator's death could sense the realm and social status of the person who held the spiritual treasure, but mortal souls would not actively differentiate. Because they did not cultivate, when they bathed in the so-called sacred river after death, it was very difficult for them to have any complicated thoughts. When they were alive, they were enslaved, and when they died in the sacred river, they were still manipulated by others. This was their true situation. They did not have such thoughts, but it did not mean that they did not have the ability to do so. The social hierarchy was a supreme existence that was deeply engraved in their hearts. It would never be erased. Once it was awakened, it would explode with shocking combat power. Outside the Eternal River Scroll, their combat power was not worth mentioning, but inside the scroll, they were undead souls. When enough weak souls gathered together, they could unleash unimaginable power. The most important thing was that the only person who could restrain them, the scroll spirit, was not here. The Eternal River Scroll's rules were that the holder could restrain the scroll spirit, and the scroll spirit could restrain the billions of souls in the scroll. Now that the scroll spirit, who was in the middle position, had been taken away, there was a lot of room for imagination. Lu Xiaoyi had done something naughty. He had deceived and spread the news of Bowazo's identity as a lowly commoner. He was not completely sure. In fact, he was not clear about the social hierarchy of the Hung River realm. All he had to do was faintly mention it, and the high-class souls would naturally differentiate between them, and they would immediately discover the secret. A lowly commoner could cultivate? He was doing even better than them, the high-class souls? How could this be tolerated? The change had begun in silence. In the beginning of the competition, Bowazo leisurely looked at the Taoist beside him who was struggling to keep up with his pace, just to spew a few words of trash. This person was really born with a sharp tongue. It was as if he wanted to take advantage of others with his mouth at every moment. It was as if he couldn't live without taking advantage of others. He allowed this Taoist to spout nonsense. Firstly, his mouth could not keep up. Secondly, he would widen the distance between them step by step during the long journey. This foul-mouthed Taoist could only look at his back in despair, unable to find a target to spout nonsense to. This was the best way to take revenge on people with foul mouths. He almost did it. When they reached about 30% of the Eternal River, the gap between the two of them began to widen. Bohezuo was very surprised at this Taoist's super strong mental strength. In his mind, a normal Yin master would be left behind if they couldn't reach 10% of the Eternal River. However, this guy actually managed to reach 30% of the Eternal River. From this, one could see how tough his mental strength was. If the two of them were to fight in the outside universe, he might not necessarily have the upper hand in terms of mental strength. This made him a little apprehensive. Peacock's relatives were indeed extraordinary. If they were to really fight, even though he was in the primordial divinity realm, it would not be easy for him. It also depended on the methods of the other party. But here, in the Eternal River, he would definitely win. As expected, when they reached about 30% of the distance, the gap between the two of them began to widen. The Taoist cursed loudly, but to Bohezuo's ears, it was incomparably painful. This was because this hysteria was expanding in the Taoist's despair. In the cultivation world, what was the use of cursing? Until the Taoist's figure could no longer be seen, and he could no longer hear his crazy curses. One of them was finished, and now there were only two left. It shouldn't take too long. At this moment, he felt that something was wrong with him. It seemed that the number of souls in his body had increased, and they were more malicious. Moreover, this situation continued to expand, becoming more and more serious. Yin Master, Primordial Divinity, Yang Master. These three types of mental strength behaved very differently in the Eternal River. Among them, the primordial divinity had the least attraction to the soul. However, the current situation had somewhat exceeded his understanding of this acquired spiritual treasure. This was not his spirit treasure, but it was sent by the master of this mission. Because many of his fellow disciples with a higher social status were unwilling to come and deal with the ever-changing demonic beasts, in the end, this mission fell on him. He was not familiar with the Eternal River Scroll Spirit, and he was very clear that these high-level souls might not take him seriously. That was why he purposely sent the Scroll Spirit away. This was his little thought. He was afraid that these fellows who valued social status above everything else would cause trouble for him during the mission. However, the current situation puzzled him. He had never thought that after the souls of the cultivators were taken away from the scroll, the sea of mortal souls would also cause harm to him. The harm was actually happening. It was not an instinctive attachment to the cultivator's spiritual body, but a conscious and purposeful hatred. It was the disdain and anger of the higher class towards the lower class. His roots, his real identity in the Hung River boundary, how was it discovered? It was impossible. Mortal souls would not have such awareness. The two peacocks and the Taoist had only met for the first time. It seemed impossible? Where did the problem come from? More and more souls took the initiative to pounce on him, especially the souls of those with high surnames. Under their lead, the sea of lowly souls who had long been used to being enslaved also followed behind their former masters. They spared no effort to perform just to be able to rise to a higher level after reincarnation. The unique structure of society in the Hung River realm meant that this kind of thing was not new. This was something that would never happen in other realms. How could mortals be dissatisfied with true cultivators, look down on them, and be filled with hatred? However, in the Hung River boundary, all of this happened naturally. Because here, social status was above everything, even higher than cultivators and mortals. Bohezuo felt helpless. He knew too well how terrifying the souls in the Eternal River Scroll were. They could not be destroyed at all. The more they struggled, the worse it would be, just like the two peacock young gods in front of him. Around his spiritual body, the souls were still gathering in large numbers. When this kind of news gradually spread, it had a certain audience, and the speed of its spread began to exponentially increase. Previously, it was a small stream, then a large river. Now, it had become a vast ocean that covered the sky and covered the earth. All the souls that pounced on him had the same consciousness. How could a lowly commoner like you have the right to do whatever you want in the Eternal River? Without the scroll spirit controlling it, the Eternal River scroll began to lose control. This was the instinct of countless souls. It was their self-indulgence because they were the unique people of the Hung River boundary. Chapter 1487. Bohal's primordial spirit swelled like a bubble. The demonic beasts outside were baffled. In fact, after such a long time, Yanjun, Kong Li, and some other discerning great demons could roughly see the truth of the Eternal River. There were countless souls in it, which was the main culprit behind the two peacock young gods swimming slower and slower. But the problem was, as the owner of the Eternal River, how did Bohal's primordial spirit swell up? People said that to kill 1,000 enemies, you would lose 800 of your own, but he lost 2,000 of his own. Among the 4 spiritual bodies, Lu Xiaoyi, who was swimming at the back, didn't seem so bloated. What's going on? Kong Li was very puzzled, but that didn't mean that the young gods didn't have her sharp eyes. The primordial spirit is the key. I guess that everything that happened in the Eternal River is related to the primordial spirit being pulled out. We have to stop it. We can't let it go back on its own. Yanjun nodded in agreement. I've already cast the wild goose fog technique around the primordial spirit. It can't go back, but it's very strange. It can clearly see that its host cultivator might be in trouble, but it doesn't seem to want to go back. It just symbolically broke through and didn't try again. It's really a strange domain. The people are strange, and the spiritual treasures are also strange. But I'm not surprised by this result. With this guy inside, how can it be normal? There will definitely be something fishy going on. The 2 peacock young gods had no idea what was going on behind them. Only one person had a thorough understanding of what was going on behind them. Lu Xiaoyi leisurely swam forward, and as expected, he saw a huge blob of mental expansion in front of him. It was so big that it took up almost 30% of the river. With such a size, it would be difficult for it to float in the Eternal River. He came to the side of the unlucky Hung River cultivator and said in surprise, "Fellow Taoist, why are you swollen? Just like a spongy sponge? Could it be that there are too many spiritual bodies of the opposite sex in the Eternal River, so you can't help it?" Bohal gritted his teeth. "Evil Tao, what did you do? Such a despicable method. You're ashamed of your Taoist ancestors." Lu Xiaoyi laughed. As expected, as expected. It's all ancestral. Speaking of which, your mentality is very wrong. Only you can win? If someone else wins, it's because they use tricks? You've been doing this ever since you entered the Eternal River Scroll. What did I say? Is this how the cultivators of the Hung River realm mingle in the outside world? Bohizo threatened, "Fellow Taoist, you have a huge grudge with the cultivators of the Hung River realm. Don't think that I can't catch you just because the universe is big. In the origin world, our Hung River sex influence is much greater than you can imagine." Lu Xiaoyi didn't care at all. He deliberately tried to seduce her. "So what? As long as I'm full, the whole family won't be hungry. Once in the universe, you'll find a hammer. I have a backer too, and it's also a great power of a major domain. The heavens are high, and the emperor is far away. What can you do to me?" The soul became more and more ferocious. The worst thing was that Lu Xiaoyi didn't care about his own body and started to use his own mind to invade Bohizo's mind. A Yin spirit body invading a primordial spirit body was very inconceivable. In the outside world, there were bodies, artifacts, and all kinds of spells. It wasn't that a Yin spirit true monarch couldn't threaten a primordial spirit body. However, on the spiritual level, it was basically impossible for a Yin spirit body to destroy a primordial spirit body. That was a realm suppression. But in this place, Lu Xiaoyi had trillions of helpers. For every bit of his soul that he destroyed, the souls of the mortals that were as ferocious as wolves and tigers would grow stronger. This time, it wasn't just a matter of how fast they swam. It had become a matter of life and death. Lu Xiaoyi sent out a message again. He vaguely said that as long as they completely devoured this cultivator's mind, every mortal soul here would be able to reincarnate faster. Under such temptation, countless mortal souls started to go berserk. To them, even if a primordial spirit body was a cultivator's, so what if they devoured it? The situation was getting more and more dangerous for Bohizo. He had to fight for his survival now. What made him even more desperate was that he didn't even know how to fight. His divine sense went straight to evil beside him. We're just competing in speed, not life and death. Fellow Taoist, aren't you afraid of harming the harmony of the world by attacking so viciously? Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, there's one thing that you people of Hung River Tribe must understand. There's a price to pay for showing off. No one will spoil your bad habit. You have to see clearly who you're teasing. You can tease kittens and puppies if you want, but if your opponent is strong enough, you'd better tie up your damned ADHD hands. It's very dangerous to reach out blindly. If others ignore you, you'll continue. If you touch something soft, you'll pinch it. This habit has to be changed. What's a competition in speed? I don't have this habit. If you dare to show off in front of me, you'll have to bear the consequences of being killed by me. Swim? Swim my ass. I don't swim. I only know how to drown people. If they drown to death, I'll naturally win. Is this logic very difficult to understand? Bohizo was swept up in a frenzy. He finally understood that this person not only had a foul mouth, but his hands were also black and his heart was even more ruthless. They didn't know each other, but he was gambling on behalf of someone else. He defined his actions as a matter of life and death. If all the people in the cultivation world were like him, how many were left? Feeling his opponent's powerful spiritual invasion, he knew that he had reached the final moment. These souls of Hung River Tribe's mortals wouldn't betray evil because he wasn't from Hung River Tribe. There was no difference in social class. Their only target was him. Although he was born lowly, he had outstanding talent and was lucky enough to walk on the path of cultivation. Under such a spiritual attack, even if he was a primordial spirit, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. He didn't have any specific techniques to deal with it because he was only a spiritual body now. Any movement would make those mortal souls even crazier. For his life, he could only use his final threat. Believe me, you can't escape. The eternal river will never be destroyed. Everything here will be transmitted back to my sect. You and your sect will be faced with countless troubles. All kinds of orthodoxies, all kinds of races. No matter how far it is the fifth ring far?
We can still find you.
There are also enemies you've never seen before. Zerg, the winged man. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Just this one sentence alone was enough to deduce a lot of things. He could even dispatch Zerg, the winged man. He didn't relax his spiritual invasion at all. He chuckled. Anything else? Let me hear it. Bohizo didn't delve deeper. He deeply felt the threat of death and changed his method. I'm just a lowly commoner. I'm the one with the least status in the Hung River Tribe. Why do you have to make things difficult for me? If you're willing to let go, I can swear that whatever happens in the Eternal River Scroll today won't be heard by a second person. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. You still know that you're a lowly commoner? Do you know why I'm scolding you? Since you've already become a monarch, and your clansmen are still living in the abyss of suffering, just based on this point, it's not a waste to be cursed. You deserve to die not because you're a lowly commoner, but because you're willing to be lowly. Chapter 1488. Under the gaze of thousands of demonic beasts, Bowazo's spiritual body began to turn illusory and was no longer solid. This meant that his spiritual power was going downhill. This meant death. It was only at this moment that the scroll spirit began to struggle violently. It was one thing to give this lowly commoner a hard time, but it was another thing to let him die. However, with Yanjun and Kong Li, two top demonic beasts at the Yang spirit level, there was no way it could break out of the encirclement. It was just a young spirit-acquired spiritual treasure. Moreover, most of the demonic beasts were not on its side this time. Extracting the scroll's spirit was the idea of the Hengi man.
Why?
Now that it was about to die, it wanted to shrink its head and deny it. Demonic beasts loved to watch deathmatch. Although it was not very exciting, it was still better than a normal battle. Gradually, the relaxed atmosphere turned serious, and then a chill enveloped his entire body. Demonic beasts were used to seeing blood and punches, so they looked down on humans scratching and scratching. Even if the demonic beasts' battle records were far inferior to that of humans, they had always regarded their own fighting style as the true fighting style between males. However, in the Eternal River, they saw a different kind of fighting style. It was a way of mercilessly devouring the souls of cultivators. Although it was not bloody, it was even crueler and colder. The demonic beast's method was fast and violent. Blood filled the sky, and their shouts shook the heavens and earth. However, this kind of soul-devouring was silent. It was plundering strand by strand, just like the comparison between being cut in half and being dismembered. Bowazo's spiritual body had expanded to a terrifying extent, almost blocking the entire river. However, compared to the size of the spiritual body, Bowazo's primordial spirit at the core had been swallowed to the edge of danger. Not only was it as small as a human fist, but it was also extremely thin. He gathered the last of his strength and shouted with his soul, "Why? Why are you so ruthless?" Lu Xiaoyi was as cold as ever. "Are you eating with your right hand? Then, what are you doing with your left hand?" Bowazo could not think of how his situation was related to this ordinary life problem. "My left hand is unclean, soap." Lu Xiaoyi slammed his spirit upwards. "So, you deserve to die." When Bowazo's spirit was devoured by the billions of souls in the Eternal River, Lu Xiaoyi found that his situation was not good. Because he was too close, he was suspected of being caught in the crossfire. Even if he was a powerful primordial spirit cultivator with extremely powerful spiritual energy, it was still a drop in the ocean when faced with the billions of souls in the Hengi realm. The competition was not over yet, because the ghost had set the ending condition for the long river swim to be that one person would be the last to finish the swim. He had not expected that someone would die in the middle. His thinking was too. No wonder he would die in his own spiritual body. Lu Xiaoyi was unlikely to compete for the first place, and it was meaningless. As long as one of the two peacock young gods went out, all he needed to do was wait quietly. But now, the wait was fraught with danger. That was because the countless souls around were still in a state of savagery and couldn't calm down on their own. Once the restlessness began, it was as if the demons that had been hiding in their hearts for a long time had been awakened. Fortunately, Lu Xiaoyi wasn't from the Hung River realm. If he was, then no matter what social class he was from, unless it was the noblest class, he would be devoured by these souls that were on the verge of losing control without leaving anything behind. However, Yanjun and Kong Li were still doing their duty. They refused to let Wanling go back to preside over the long scroll. They were afraid that if something went wrong, the people of Hengi River would refuse to admit their mistakes. They had to wait for Peacock Sun's spirit to wander to the end of the duel. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he was in danger. The problem was that he couldn't run fast enough. There are actually many other ways to cross the social hierarchy. You don't have to wait for reincarnation. Now, let me tell you a story. There are two main characters in the story, Chen Sheng and Wu Guang. He tried to tell it as vividly and in detail as possible, and he even added some details. Because he didn't know when the two Peacock Sun's spirit would be able to swim out. Now it seemed that it was impossible to reach a fast speed with the help of these endless souls. But no matter how long the story was, there would be a time when it was finished. If too much information was added, it would become bloated and affect the overall interest and provocation of the story. However, the two peacocks were not finished yet. He had to start telling a new story because the soul's interest had been aroused. Moreover, they seemed to be dissatisfied with the tragic ending. What I just said represented a kind of spirit. It doesn't mean that it will definitely fail. I'm telling it to you so that you know the meaning of resistance. Next, let's tell you the story of Grandpa Liu Bang. This story was much longer. With many tragic heroes as a foil, the main character's image was very full and wise. The result was a happy ending for everyone, but the souls were still not satisfied. This was because the main character was already 54 years old when he succeeded. It seemed like he could not enjoy anything anymore. Why were they so picky? The two peacocks weren't very helpful, so Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to waste his breath. Now, Big Brother Zhu Yuanzhong has made his grand entrance. This is a powerful person who ascended the throne at the age of 40. Big Brother Zhu didn't even finish half of the story when the Eternal River suddenly collapsed. Lu Xiaoyi was thrown out of the acquired spiritual treasure, and Kong, she was the first to rush out of the Eternal River, completing the setting of the bet between Bozol and himself. Among the demonic beasts, other than the roe deer race and their allies, the rest of the demonic beasts calmly accepted this result. This was the good thing about demonic beasts. Although they were brave and ruthless, they were willing to admit defeat and never acted shamelessly. Once the result was out, Yanjun and Kong Li withdrew their control over the spirit. With a flash, the spirit disappeared into the long scroll of the Eternal River. With another sweep, it wanted to sweep up Bohezuo's corporeal body. However, its movements weren't as fast as Yanjun's fog, and it swept up nothing. This spiritual treasure was also very clever. It knew that it couldn't be impudent in the beast territory, and since it had lost its controller, it could only resign itself to its fate. The entire Eternal River flashed a few times in the starry sky and disappeared. This kind of treasure couldn't be held because its roots were in the Hung River boundary, in the true mother stream of the Hung River boundary. There was no power in this world that could stop its return. At the very least, the Yang spirit demonic beasts present couldn't. The roe deer race left resentfully. They couldn't fight or even question because they had tacitly agreed to let the Hung River human cultivators do it. If they fought now, it wouldn't be a problem of whether they could establish a foothold in this space, but a problem of whether they could establish a foothold in the beast territory. These Hung River people were too weak. Chapter 1489. Lu Xiaoyi walked over as if nothing had happened. Yanjun and the three peacock young gods surrounded him. Yanjun was very anxious. Yijuan, why did you kill him? Lu Xiaoyi spread his hands. If I didn't kill him, would I have raised him for the new year? Besides, it wasn't me who killed him. It was the billions of reincarnated souls of the Hung River realm. It was the result of the internal conflict of the Hung River realm. I just, gave them some advice. He looked at the young gods and comforted them. Don't worry. Orthodoxies like the Hung River realm only remember to kill, but not to be beaten. The more you beat them, the thicker their skin will become. They will think that you don't dare to kill them. Even if you killed him, believe it or not, the news in the Hung River realm will be that the cultivators of the Hung River realm showed their power in the beast territory and killed many people and beasts before dying bravely in battle. They will be very good at comforting themselves. Don't worry. The next time they come to the beast territory, they will know how to tuck their tails between their legs. Seeing the young gods pondering, he said seriously, the universe is chaotic. We can't show weakness to others. We have to show our toughness on certain occasions. Otherwise, people will take a mile after taking an inch. Different times should have different attitudes. The current era is not the era of cowardice. The three peacock young gods lowered their noble peacock heads. Yanjun was also very depressed. He still didn't understand the relationship between this Taoist and the Green Peacock clan. Kong Li also didn't mention it, which made him very suspicious. The demonic beasts had left, but here they met happily. Kong Shi smiled. The Green Peacock clan is not afraid of revenge. The beast territory is not a place where anyone can come and dominate. It's useless if there are too few of them. If there are too many of them, we can just use guerrilla warfare. Most demonic beasts don't have a fixed residence.
Who can we attack?
I actually hope that the Hung River realm will do this and reunite the beast territory. But I don't think they will have any reaction to this. Although we haven't been to the Hung River realm, after so many years of living together, we always feel that the Hung River realm is scheming something. Before their true intentions are revealed, they won't easily make a move against the beast territory. There's no profit to be made, and they won't gain any fame. Instead, they'll only make the demon beasts of the origin world work together against a common enemy. Why bother? Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. Sure enough, the Yang spirit was not given in vain. Even if he did not have much contact with the outside world, he could still keenly perceive some things. Haven't you all thought of going to Hengi Realm to take a look? Calm, she shook her head. In the past, I didn't go because I subconsciously felt uncomfortable with this world. This is the intuition of us demonic beasts. This time, after entering the Eternal River, I directly gave up on this idea. However, if fellow Taoist requests us to do something there, we will not refuse. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, What do I need you to do? Lords of Kong are too polite. You don't have to go, and I won't go either. I don't want to be stained with filth. Now that I've come out, even though it's my spiritual body that has entered, I can't help but feel the stench of a corpse on my body. The two peacock young gods who had been inside felt the same way. That kind of feeling could not be understood without personal experience. It was beyond normal knowledge. Why are the people of Hengi obsessed with the peacock feather? Do you all have any guesses about the purpose? Playing with the peacock feather in his hand, Lu Xiaoyi was very curious about the purpose of the people of Hengi realm. Although it was his first time coming in contact with it, he felt that this realm was most likely related to the attack on the fifth ring. There was no direct evidence, only a few words from the cultivator of Hengi realm. There were also some specious things. He would not put in the effort to investigate. He had long passed the childish obsession of Jean Dan. He had his suspicions. This was enough. How many groundless crimes were there in the cultivation world? Calm, she sorted out her thoughts. The peacock feather is the most precious treasure of our race. It is impossible to give it to outsiders so easily. The one we gave them is only a high-quality imitation. We made it very clear at the beginning. This peacock feather has many uses, but I don't think they will use the peacock feather in a personal battle. In such a big realm, how can it be short of a spiritual treasure? So the most likely possibility is that the peacock feather has a very heaven-defying and mysterious function. It can, to a certain extent, confuse the direction of a realm's fate. The people of Hengi realm must have thought of this because they have heard of the peacock feather's magic. But a high-quality imitation is not a source box, and its effect is much worse. They thought that the difference was not big, but in the end, there was a difference. This time, they invited us not because they wanted us to control the imitation, but because they wanted us to use the real thing. I don't know what direction of Hengi realm's fate they want to hide. In the past few hundred years, we haven't heard of any big movements from them. Lu Xiaoyi felt something in his heart, but he did not say anything. There was no need to spread this kind of thing.
It was fine as long as they knew about it.
There was no need to rush. In this big battle, everyone had thrown their arms around, but in the end, they realized that this was just a warm-up. In the cultivation world, winning or losing was not important. What was important was that you were still standing. Calmly interrupted, If Yijun is interested, why don't you take this peacock feather and play with it? At the same time, you can help us see how the Hengi realm uses it. You humans are better at these things. Later, we will reveal the core secrets of the peacock feather. With Yijun's ability to obtain 7 rays of light, you won't disgrace this treasure. Lu Xiaoyi declined. I don't care about treasures. I think it's better to leave such a precious item with the peacock clan. Calm, she continued. Yijun, please don't decline. There is a strange thing about the peacock clan's source box. It repels each other, even if it's the real thing, and the imitation. Now that we think about it, we didn't consider carefully when we refined this imitation, and we don't want to destroy it. After all, it's a waste of effort. Why don't Yijun take it away? Our Peacock clan will never refine such an imitation again. It will ruin the source box's power. Lu Xiaoyi chatted happily with the Peacock clan and the Swan Goose clan, but no one asked him about the origin of his relatives. They were all great cultivators, and they understood the right and wrong of human relationships very well. They knew that these kinds of private matters could not be asked unless the person involved brought it up. The swan geese did not ask because this Taoist was not their relative, and the peacocks did not ask because they did not dare to pry into the ancestors' privacy. After a few days, the two parties reluctantly parted ways. The peacock clan had to deal with the aftermath of the beast territory. They had also realized that some of the beasts had an unsettling tendency during this beast gathering, and they needed to come up with countermeasures as the leaders of the beasts. The universe was in chaos, but their clan could not fall into chaos. Otherwise, they would be courting death. Lu Xiaoyi and the Swan Goose clan continued their journey. After flying for a short distance, Goose Lord could not hold it in any longer. Yijun, what do you want the Hengi Realm person's corpse for? Are you interested in pickling it for a specimen? Chapter 1490. When a human cultivator kills someone, looting the corpse is the right of the victor.
What's so strange about that?
Come. Take out all of this guy's treasures. I heard that the Great Geese race has special spatial abilities. Why don't you show it to me today? After hearing Lu Xiaoyi's words, the Great Geese could only nod helplessly. They had used him for nothing, and now he was asking them to do their best. It was fair and reasonable. This kid really did not want to suffer any losses. The two top existences among the immemorial sacred beasts, the Phoenix and the Great Rock, both had Tao realm talent. Other immemorial beasts usually had their own special abilities. Those with Tao realm talent were rare. Most of them were still at the acquired Great Tao, or had only dabbled in the innate Great Tao. However, the Phoenix and the Great Rock were different. Their Tao realm talent was the best, and they had the right to fuse their Great Tao. They were the only two immemorial beasts who had this right. Of course, whether they could fuse their Great Tao would depend on their strength against humans. That was another matter. At the very least, the Phoenix and the Great Rock had this right. Other immemorial beasts did not even have this right. The Phoenix's Tao realm talent was destiny. The Great Rock's Tao realm talent was chaos. Because they were good at chaos, the Great Rock was the race most compatible with the universe in the cultivation world of the universe. There was no other race. Of course, the chaotic ability could also be used in other areas. For example, the storage space in the storage ring. Bawazo's corpse was brought out by Yanjun's wild goose mist. Every storage ring and item on his body was carefully inspected. Some storage spaces were not in the form of storage rings, but in different shapes and sizes. One would need to have a high level of spatial ability to identify them. One misconception was that one needed to be in the spatial Tao realm to crack the storage ring. This did not mean that this was wrong, but in reality, the chaotic ability was sometimes better than the chaotic ability in cracking space. The Great Geese King appeared to be very impatient, as if this kind of behavior was detrimental to its noble status. However, from the way it handled it, it was quite skilled. It was obvious that it had done this many times. There were no saints or sacred beasts in the cultivation world of the universe. The difficulty of survival always forced cultivators to try every role they wanted to play. It was not up to their will. Soon, piles of cultivation artifacts were displayed in front of everyone. None of them were jealous. They were all true monarchs, so they naturally understood that these human friends didn't want to rely on these things to make a fortune. They just wanted to discover something from them. As for what they wanted to discover, they didn't care. This was the filth between humans. Only a fool would get involved in it. Yanjun dug through all the belongings of the Hung River sect cultivators. None of the space containers had exploded due to triggering restrictions. This was the power of the chaos. Of course, there was also the sophistication of the person who did it. Fortunately, although I haven't used it for many years, my craftsmanship hasn't returned to normal. Yanjun mocked himself. Lu Xiaoyi didn't hold back at all. Come on, we're all friends. There's no need to hide it like this, right? You look like you're used to it. You haven't done it in years? Are you trying to fool a fool? He divided the items into several categories. There were miscellaneous items in the mortal world, spiritual vigor resources, artifacts and treasures, and finally, there were various jade slips that were worth investigating. The jade slips that a primordial soul cultivator carried with him were like a mobile hung river sect. Many things could be discovered from them, as long as you were careful enough. There was a long time to pass. It was also interesting to study the history of the Hung River sect in their spare time. After putting away the items, everyone resumed their journey. The geese began to speed up. In the entire formation of the geese, there was a guy who wasn't big, but who was surrounded by 7-colored brilliance when he flew. He was especially eye-catching. Yes, the green peacocks fulfilled the request of this relative and put the most beautiful feathers on his fake wings. The geese that flew along the way were very depressed. The whole team's limelight had been stolen by a certain eccentric. The rest of the journey was very smooth. In this beast territory, the geese were considered the top existence. They were much more popular than the peacocks, so they were not disturbed. To Lu Xiaoyi, it was like a king patrolling his territory. Here, he made many demon friends. Of course, there were also many strange, astronomical phenomena. More importantly, in traveling with the geese, he had a deep understanding of the Tao realm of chaos. In terms of learning, he was willing to be the disciple of any living being. In the Khanate Great Tao, Tai, Taichu, Taisher, Taisu, and then the chaotic universe. In other words, with the geese's ability, their natural Tao realm was actually the closest to the 5 Taisu. This would be of great help to Lu Xiaoyi in understanding the 5 Taisu. Why are there so few Tai fragments after the collapse of Tai? Why haven't I heard of them? Is there a special reason? This was a question that Lu Xiaoyi had always wanted to ask. The Goose King answered him, of course they exist. It's just that most cultivators can't sense them. The Khanate 5 Taisu, including the chaos, is the most primitive stage of the universe's formation. However, once these fragments fly into the universe, they will merge with the most primitive part of the universe. You can't see them or feel them because your understanding of the 5 Taisu is not deep enough. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. One day, when your understanding crosses a certain threshold, you will find that they may be right beside you. Among the 36 Khanate Great Taos, they are the hardest to find because they are a part of the universe. They are not like the other Great Tao fragments that are clearly separated in the void. This is why you haven't found the Tai fragments. Lu Xiaoyi understood a little. It was because the 5 Taisu fragments and perhaps the chaos fragments were not as conspicuous as the other Great Tao fragments when they appeared in the universe. This was because they were a part of the universe. Have you ever seen a Tai fragment? The Goose King shook his head. I'm just unlucky. That's why I'm not fated with it. Also, we monsters don't need it. To us, instinct is the best. I'm just a great Goose King in the Chaos Tao realm. Isn't it unnecessary for you to make me experience the 5 Taisu? Not every person or demon beast had a need for Grand Tao fragments like Lu Xiaoyi. To the vast majority of cultivators, they only needed to obtain the fragment that they needed the most, who would bite off more than they could chew. It seemed that the threshold to merge the 5 Taisu fragments was very high. The key was that there were very few human cultivators who had studied the 5 Taisu. Therefore, there were very few rumors of similar fragments in the universe. Perhaps no one really searched for them. This was the current state of the collapse of the Khanate Great Taos. There were those who fought for it, and there were those who threw it on the street and didn't want it. Chapter 1491. There would always be a day when a journey would come to an end. After experiencing the last strange, celestial phenomenon in the beast territory, the flock of geese turned around and Lu Xiaoyi kept moving forward. The flock of geese continued to patrol the beast territory, and Lu Xiaoyi still insisted on his journey. There was no farewell, nor was there any sadness. They were able to fly together because they shared similar interests and shared similar sentiments. The geese let out a long cry in unison while Lu Xiaoyi flapped his eye-catching wings. It was as if an airplane was bidding farewell to a train and going their separate ways. The beast territory had been very happy for more than 20 years. This was the cultivation in his heart. There were like-minded friends, unpredictable celestial phenomena, and the people of Hengi who could provide entertainment. This huge space was made up of several large plates. The beast territory was one, the several universes of Hengi realm were another, and the next one he was going to enter was another. It was still barren and still uninhabited. This was the world of the void beasts. Therefore, no matter how eye-catching it was, this pair of gorgeous wings pieced together by goose and peacock feathers could not be used. It was like a bright light in the dark night and would cause him endless trouble. Here, he found a weak positive and negative space wall and made a positioning. He entered the negative space and came back again. This was a necessary procedure. He would do this every few decades to ensure that he would not make a mistake, at least in Dafa, until he entered a space he had entered with the spirit treasure. The process was quite smooth. It was under control, and the direction was clear. Ever since he came out of Zhou Xian, he had been flying in the void for 40 to 50 years. He had already flown the furthest distance he had ever flown. Every part of the universe that followed was unfamiliar and dangerous to him. After entering the level of Supreme, one's reliance on the coordinates was limited to determining one's location. In fact, for every Yang spirit, some primordial spirits that dabbled in a wide range of things, or a very abnormaline spirit, as long as they could perceive the thin walls of the positive and negative space, they could rely on their own strength to travel back and forth. Lu Xiaoyi had been exploring the positive and negative space since the beginning of the Yuanying, and now he could barely travel between the positive and negative space freely. The premise was that he had to find the weak points. In this regard, he was definitely not as good as the Yang spirits. The specific performance was that he could find fewer points and had higher requirements. A few days later, the positioning was completed. On the way back, he followed his usual cautiousness and did not use the passage into the negative space. Instead, he used a passage that was slightly further away. It might be tens of thousands of miles away from the original location of the main world. This was his habit. When he was in Yuanying, it took him an hour to break through the barrier. Now that he was a supreme, this time had been shortened to a moment. If he was a powerful Yang spirit, the time needed was calculated in breaths. The advantage of a short time was that he might not be able to react to the malicious actions of the other side. However, a moment was still full of danger. This was why he could not frequently switch back and forth between the positive and negative spaces. Under his full power, the raft accumulated energy very quickly. It quickly accumulated energy, passed through quickly, and passed through quickly. When he was about to emerge from the main world, a sense of danger suddenly descended upon him. Someone was outside, and they were up to no good. Just like when he used the Imperial Beast Orthodoxy as a sacrifice when he returned to the Green Void, he was now in a dilemma. If he went back, the passage would have already begun to collapse. If he rushed forward, who knew what would be waiting for him? In a flash, he reached out and pulled out the corpse of the Hengi cultivator. He had never been willing to keep such disgusting things, but in order to fully understand the Hengi realm, he made an exception and put the corpse of the Hengi cultivator into his storage ring. The body of a cultivator did not decay and could last for a long time in an environment like the void. This was especially so for the Hengi cultivator. He did not die in a normal battle. His spirit was not there, but his physical functions were not damaged at all. In fact, he was the best material to make a zombie. Of course, this was just a random thought of Lu Xiaoyi. He would not really do it. But now, the situation was urgent, and he had to do something. When it came to zombies, he did not have any concept or interest in them. However, during those years of being a king zombie, the environment forced him to have some rough understanding of how zombies were formed. At that time, he was trying to determine where the zombies came from, what methods were used to refine them, and where the orthodoxy was. During this process, he also had a certain understanding of zombie refining techniques. Although it was not too profound, he knew a few simple and violent techniques. For example, the most direct and violent technique: exploding corpses. Exploding corpses, not moving corpses. It meant that regardless of whether the corpse would be damaged in the future or whether it could still be used, it was used in the shortest time possible. Simply put, it was treated as a one-time consumable. It did not matter if it could be refined into a qualified zombie in the future. It was just right to use it now. Bohal's corpse was thrown out, and at the same time, he tapped on the corpse's brain. The strange technique of exploding corpses rushed into the brain, and this primordial spirit opened its eyes as if it had come alive. This was a body reaction that had no intelligence and was purely based on instinct. It also contained a bit of the zombie's will. The technique was crude and inexperienced, and he did not know how to control his strength. In the eyes of the zombies, this was a complete failure. It was not exploding corpses, it was destroying corpses. But when used here, it could explode the body's greatest potential in the next few breaths of time, and then it would be completely destroyed. The moment Bohal rushed out of the main world, the power of the array that had been set up in the surroundings struck his body, and not a single bit missed. At the same time, his body was swept into a long scroll and disappeared. However, to the attacker's surprise, the unique technique from his unique orthodoxy didn't have the expected effect on this person's body. There was only one possibility for such a result. This person's technique was similar to his, so he wasn't afraid of the attack from the sacred river. In the next moment, the attacker saw clearly who had rushed out. Junior brother Bohal, you're not dead? The ambush plan was very meticulous, and after years of stalking, he finally found an opportunity to wait for the opponent to enter the negative space. But with all the arrangements, the ambush did not go smoothly from the start. That evil path was abnormally cunning, and there was a difference between where it entered the negative space and where it came out of the main world. This caused the attacker to lose the chance to activate his most powerful killing move. By the time he realized that the evil path might be tens of thousands of miles away, although he could still rush over in advance, it was clearly too late to set up the ambush. Thus, he could only choose the second strategy, which was to pull the opponent into the Eternal River scroll that he was most proficient in. Dealing with him in the Eternal River would be more effective with half the effort. The second strategy also failed, because he had confiscated the evil path, but he had taken his junior brother in instead. Although he immediately realized that this was actually not his junior brother, but his junior brother's body that was being controlled, the mistake had already been made. Although he was the one who initiated the ambush, he had lost time at the most crucial moment of the ambush. A sword light shot out, and a sword river instantly covered the horizon. The main character had come out. Chapter 1492. The ambusher took the long scroll of the Eternal River and flew thousands of miles away. His flying sword fell, and countless corpses were destroyed. Those were the souls of the cultivators in the long scroll of the Eternal River. When it came into contact with the swordsman, it finally showed its true offensive and defensive abilities. The long scroll of the Eternal River really made a difference, whether it had a scroll spirit or not. He did not care about the failure of the ambush. To the strongest primordial soul cultivator of the Hengi boundary, dealing with the Een Master was not a challenge at all. The reason why he kept following them was because he was afraid of those annoying geese. This time, they came out as a two-person trip. He was outside, while Bo Hazwa was inside. With the power of the long scroll of the Eternal River, it was a sure-win bet. He was not as good as junior brother Bo when it came to guessing people's minds. Moreover, he was a straightforward person and was not good at negotiation. If the two of them went together, it would be bad. Who would have thought that this would be the result? When the long scroll of the Eternal River returned to his hand, he immediately knew about the changes in the beast territory and followed them out. Those who stayed in the Eternal River, even if they were Een Masters, would not be able to escape his tracking. This was the uniqueness of the sacred river, and outsiders could not understand it. Of course, he wanted to take revenge. Since he could not take revenge on the peacock young master in the beast territory, he could only target the real culprit. He followed them for several years, which was nothing to a primordial soul cultivator. He knew that there was a young master among the geese, so he just followed them from afar. With the long scroll of the eternal river, he was not afraid of the culprit escaping. He did not believe that the geese could continue to escort them like this. As expected, once they got close to the beast territory, the group of humans and beasts went their separate ways. This was his chance. His name was Curry, and he was of noble birth. He was of the Hung River realm and was in charge of combat. He had many cultivation techniques and secret skills that had been passed down for a long time. Furthermore, he was extremely talented and had his own unique traits in combat. Therefore, he was known as the #1 combat expert of the Hung River realm. It was not an exaggeration at all. With such experience and status, it was impossible for him to take Ain Master seriously, no matter how heaven-defying he was. What surprised him was that the Taoist revealed his orthodoxy, the swordsman. Swordsman had been in the limelight for a while now, and he had long wanted to meet him. But to what extent could he reach? In the eyes of outsiders, swordsmen from the origin world were actually divided into two types, a 5-ring swordsman and a non-5-ring swordsman. However, he did not know which type he had encountered. Lu Xiaoyi rushed out of the passageway with a sword river protecting his body. Although it was dangerous, he was not injured. However, he knew very well that if he hadn't changed the direction of the wall and thrown out Hung He's corpse in advance, he would definitely have been injured. Moreover, he would have been swimming in that smelly ditch. Although he had already gone in once, he did not want to go in a second time. He did not think that he had confidence in the holy river of the Hengi realm. Whether there was a curled spirit or not, and whether the person in charge was competent, all determined the power of this acquired spirit treasure at the level of young spirit. This was not a spiritual treasure in the ordinary sense.
He was very clear about this.
It was a completely foreign orthodoxy, but he did not care. This was because he had a premonition that sooner or later he would have a large-scale conflict with this orthodoxy. Therefore, he did not mind testing the so-called unique skills of the Hengi realm in advance. It was also because of this that when his sword river gushed out, he did not use his full strength. An ordinary 100,000 sword lights was the average level of most origin world swordsmen. There was nothing much to say. Moreover, he did not think that he had anything in common with the people of the Hengi realm. With the guidance of his flying sword, the sword river condensed, and he disappeared on the spot, dodging the sweep of the eternal river. The flying sword had already appeared above Ka Li's head. Simple, direct, and violent, Ka Li began to dance. At least from Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, this was a dance. It was a dance that transformed the dodging technique into the ultimate dance. In every graceful twist and turn, there was actually a profound change in the small space. Twisting and turning, he dodged the sharp sword lights in a small space. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi saw a cultivator who could dodge the surprise attack of a flying sword in such a small space. Dodging and art were perfectly integrated into one. It looked like the person was there, but in the graceful dance, there was a feeling that he could not land on solid ground. It was very beautiful. It was just that when a man danced like this, it was somewhat neither male nor female. Therefore, he knew that a single sword attack might be useless against this person. At least while he was still able to maintain this graceful dance, the attack of the flying sword would miss. There was indeed a set of moves. It was an extreme fusion of space and judgment. In close combat, there was even a faint disturbance to the flying sword's spirit controlling the flying sword. If the flying sword wanted to be fast, there must be a launching distance. With a launching distance, there would be enough space for this kind of dance to twist and dodge. The only problem was if he used his full strength to move the sword at its peak speed, would the opponent be able to dodge it? This was something he would slowly test in the future. As for now, he still had to see the other abilities of this Hengi realm cultivator. You might be able to dodge one flying sword, but what about multiple? What about indiscriminate attacks? Lu Xiaoyi continued to sway unsteadily in the void. The sword river split, no longer gathering into one sword light, but into 100, forming an indiscriminate sword rain in the narrow space. Even if you twisted like a fried dough twist, you would not be able to dodge all the attacks. The opponent was not idle. Clearly, he had rich battle experience and did not accept the situation of being beaten passively. The Dance King form changed. It had already turned into a hideous human head. It was the form of terror. The most direct result of the terrifying face was a direct blast on Lu Xiaoyi's soul. It was not the kind of blast that was made of spiritual energy, but a mysterious, unseen spiritual blast that crushed Lu Xiaoyi's consciousness on the level of consciousness. Lu Xiaoyi's sparrow palace bird flapped its wings, rejecting this kind of threat. This kind of spiritual contest was not dispensable. If it was a cultivator with weak spiritual ability, with just this, the flying sword would have lost control and deviated. But Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword did not deviate. Without the slightest deviation, the 100 sword lights arranged into a strict sword formation. In order to prevent the opponent's Dance King form from dodging, the sword formation's arrangement was still constantly changing. This time, Curry did not use the Dance King form again. Instead, he shook his head. There were two faces on his shoulders, but it was the form of a martial artist, the form of Superman. The 100 sword lights pierced his body, but were all deflected. It was as if his body was slippery, and the force was not correct. The 100 sword lights slashed across his body, but only left a few dozen white marks, which recovered in an instant. This was the strongest inheritance of Hengi Realm's orthodoxy. It had many forms, but it was omnipotent. For example, in Curry's sect, there were many mysterious external forms. For example, the form of Lin Jia, the form of terror, the form of gentle, the form of Superman, the form of three faces, the Dance King form, the form of the Lord of Glass, the form of the Lord of Half-Women, and so on. It was enough to deal with any situation. This was the source of Curry's confidence. Chapter 1493. Both sides had yet to achieve anything, but they were both cautious of each other's moves. This was a difficult opponent that couldn't be underestimated. Lu Xiaoyi gradually discovered the secret of the Hung River disguise in the transition between attack and defense. Among all the disguises, the three faces used in battle was a very important disguise magnifier. It could perform three faces at the same time to complete the transition between attack and defense, and there was no need to attack or defend at the same time. The rhythm of operation was very easy to be grasped. When the three faces were used together, one could attack and two could defend, or two could attack and one could defend. In the Hung River transformation technique, he had already seen the Dance King technique, three faces technique, Superman technique, terror technique. What else was there? Curry felt that something wasn't right. Even though the swordsman's attacks were perfectly blocked by him, the swordsman's attacks didn't land on him at all. This was a very strange matter. It was so strange that even the swordsman himself didn't notice it. Why did his attacks always fail? It was as if there were countless coincidences, and all his attacks missed. There were many reasons. The swordsman's speed was very fast, his judgment was very accurate, his reaction was very sharp, his timing was perfect, and he had some strange luck. Even after trying for so long, he still couldn't feel his opponent's pulse. His opponent's attack and defense were on a completely different level. The swordsman's attack was weak, and didn't display the strong offense and weak defense characteristic of the swordsman. However, the swordsman's defense was watertight. It was as if the swordsman's tight defense was purely due to luck. This wasn't normal. Curry's battle experience was very rich. Not only had he fought in the Hung River realm, he was also one of the few who had seen the world outside. With this kind of experience, he could faintly smell a hint of a conspiracy in this battle. He felt that this battle was very unreal. He had already used more than half of his disguises, but his opponent seemed to be the same as when they first met. His opponent simply leaped and attacked with his sword. In this process, his skills and trump cards were slowly exposed in front of others. But did his opponent have any trump cards?
No.
He just attacked with his sword. Every time he attacked, he would change his position. He didn't even know how he had come up with most of the disguises. According to his battle experience, whenever he encountered such a situation, it meant that his opponent was relatively strong. But now, why did he feel that he only needed to use one more move to take down his opponent? It was under this kind of feeling that he exposed his appearance one by one. As an essence soul-perfected lord, he immediately realized the most probable reason for all of this when such a feeling of uneasiness surfaced. His opponent wasn't going all out at all. He was merely feigning civility and observing his strength. Perhaps he was observing the strength of Hung River orthodoxy. As for the opponent's true strength, according to the tradition of swordsmen who are generally strong in offense and weak in defense, the fact that this person in front of him could take care of himself so well only meant that once his attack power was released, it would be extremely terrifying. This person didn't take him seriously at all. He was just training the eagle. Based on Curry's intuition, he quickly figured out the truth behind this battle. He expanded his imagination a little and thought about the recent famous swordsmen in the universe. Furthermore, he was at the master level. Then he thought about the direction he was flying in and realized that he came from the faraway Zhou Xian. Then it was obvious who this person was. He couldn't help but feel a chill rising from the depths of his soul. Although he was indeed strong, and although he knew that there weren't many opponents below the Yang God level in the main world, he still couldn't ignore the fact that this person in front of him was someone who had slain a Yang God. And there seemed to be more than one. He had cultivated for 3,000 years. He was very clear on how he had progressed all this way. Strength was only one aspect. More importantly, he knew what kind of opponent could fight him to the death and what kind of battle he had to retreat from. In terms of raw strength, he was definitely not stronger than this swordsman, except for his realm. Swordsman's strongest point was the decisive battle on the line between life and death. If you were to fight against a swordsman with similar strength, you must not push yourself to the brink of death. You might think that you're cutting off all means of retreat, but you're actually walking right into the swordsman's trap. He couldn't fight this battle anymore. Even if he still had some secret cards up his sleeve, they weren't just in disguise. He still had other things up his sleeves. But the problem was, did the swordsman not have any trump cards up his sleeve? Apart from his ordinary sword attacks, he still hadn't shown the swordsman's talent in attack. A person who could summon the wind and rain in a cosmic war, a person who could slay a Yang God. Would you believe that he only had this level of offensive ability? Curry knew that he was in extreme danger. Fortunately, danger wouldn't come for the time being, because this swordsman still wanted to see more from him. A battle between cultivators of their realm was no longer an ordinary slaughter. It had even surpassed the boundaries of the Dao realm. With his intuition, it was more important to judge a person's heart. Do you need to know what the opponent is thinking? What is he scheming? What are you afraid of? If you don't know these things, then what's the difference between you and the ordinary people in the mortal world? His only advantage now was that his opponent still didn't know that he had already judged the swordsman's intentions. This gave him the opportunity to easily escape. Junior Brother Boo's death wasn't unjust. Competing in swimming with such an opponent, I really don't know what he was thinking. Since he had already decided to leave, he naturally had a meticulous plan. During the battle with the swordsman, he vaguely showed signs of another disguise. This was the appearance of a half-woman, a very mysterious disguise. There was only one goal, which was to attract the swordsman's curiosity and lure him into waiting for his disguise to complete, thus buying him time. As for him, he would never come up with another disguise. The swordsman's attacks were still not extreme. It made him feel danger, and this danger was at the edge of his defense. In the past, he would take the initiative to counterattack, but now he wouldn't. He wouldn't leave anything new for this guy. You want to know? Go to the Hung River boundary. During Curry's attack, the scroll of Eternal River was his treasure. With this river, he could change his position around the river to block part of the swordsman's flying swords. Furthermore, he could see that his plan of luring the swordsman into the scroll of Eternal River wouldn't succeed. With the swordsman's movement speed, it would be very difficult for him to be sucked into the sacred river. This swordsman was very cautious. Even if he had entered the Hung River before and even killed someone, he didn't want to rely on it. Instead, he hid far away. This was the cautiousness that an outstanding warrior must have. This was the most difficult type of cultivator to deal with. Patient, treacherous, he was obviously strong, but he still pretended to be harmless. When he made his move, it would be the end. In the cultivation records, cultivators were often described as hot-blooded and brainless, disregarding everything for the sake of their Tao heart. This was a fundamentally wrong way of thinking. When facing an enemy that they couldn't deal with temporarily, cultivators would always have other methods. The scroll of Eternal River once again swept towards the swordsman. However, this time, the Eternal River was much longer. One end was on the battlefield, while the other end was already millions of miles away. Chapter 1494. Lu Xiaoyi immediately noticed this abnormal change in the Eternal River. For an acquired spirit treasure with the shape of a great river, which was designed to drag people away, if the river was too long, it would be inconvenient for the acquired spirit treasure to move around. For example, if one wanted to tie a person up, would one wave a rope that was miles long? It was fine as long as it was enough. It was the same for the Eternal River scroll. Considering the range of their escape, the size of the battlefield, and a little more margin, it was more appropriate to control the length of the Eternal River to be tens of thousands of miles. This Hung River cultivator had done so before, but now he suddenly stretched the Eternal River to over 1,000,000 miles. What was he up to? He still couldn't figure it out. He saw Daoist Hung. He stepped into the long scroll of the Eternal River himself, and even turned back to look at him meaningfully. He revealed a mocking smile. In the next moment, the sacred river contracted, but with the farthest point as the starting point, Kali was instantly brought 1,000,000 miles away. This method of escape was too fast for someone like him to catch up. He had been tricked. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the empty surroundings and shook his head. An experienced cultivator with his own intuition towards battle. Moreover, he probably knew who he was. It was a pity, but not much. He didn't regret his strategy. Compared to using all his strength to kill this person from the start, it was more important to understand the Hung River orthodoxy. The Hung River orthodoxy was often mentioned in Bohezuo's Jade Slip, but looking at the Jade Slip and directly fighting with a real person were two different things. Previously, his understanding of the Hung River orthodoxy was only on paper, such as the body meridians and the Dharma transformation of Buddhism. But now that he was there, he knew that there was a big difference. It was worth it to be able to see the transformation of 6 or 7 Hung River orthodoxies. Actually, of all the Hung River cultivators' transformations, the one he wanted to see the most was the Lin Jia orthodoxy. He was very curious. If he really used it, would it be the mumbling blob? It was actually the reproductive orthodoxy. He had gained a lot from this battle. That was what it meant. As long as this Hung River cultivator had the Eternal River scroll, it would be very difficult for him to kill him. In terms of strength, he didn't have much of an advantage against a peak primordial spirit cultivator. This guy was too cowardly and didn't even dare to try. How much of a threat could such a person pose? Lu Xiaoyi continued his journey as if nothing had happened. But as he sped along, he still made a careful inventory of the spoils he had obtained from the Battle of Hung River. He wanted to know how this guy had fallen for him. After all, he was a true monarch. When he carefully examined himself, he quickly realized that the problem was not with the items, but with his spirit. After coming out of the Eternal River, there was still some kind of imprint left on him. He had to admit that this stinky ditch really had something special. This was a very special way to leave a mark. What was left behind was thoughts and a deep impression of the river. As long as one kept brooding over the dirty and messy river, this so-called holy river would always be able to find one. If he traveled in this way for a long time, his vigilance would involuntarily decrease. This was something he needed to be vigilant about. He was now a very famous person in the universe. He had many friends, and even more enemies. If he was seriously injured as soon as he left the main world, he believed that this person would definitely not leave. He would definitely fight to the death with him. These things were also very good at seizing the opportunity. He didn't have much time to think about the problem of the He world. Because in this space, he still had to face a species that was completely different from the friendly demonic beasts. Void beasts. In the ranking of the aggressiveness to attack humans, in order of threat from lowest to highest, they were anti-space demonic beast, anti-space void beast, main time demonic beast, and main world void beast. Among them, the void beasts of the main world were the most aggressive towards humans. This was a publicly acknowledged fact in the entire cultivation world. It wasn't that the void beasts of the main world were more violent, but that the humans of the main world bullied them much more than the anti-space demonic beasts. In the anti-space, human cultivators basically spent most of their time on the Heaven's Choice continent. The continent was big enough, and there were countless innate and postnatal Tao tablets. There was no need for cultivators to go to the anti-space void to look for opportunities. Also, the anti-space void's spiritium density was much lower than the main world. The way they obtained spiritium was mostly from the 10,000 Tao tablets. All these reasons added together formed a situation where humans dominated the Heaven's Choice continent in the anti-space. The demonic beasts dominated the void outside the continent. Since there was very little contact, there was no history of grievances. These beasts weren't idiots. Of course, they wouldn't easily attack the humans who dominated the cultivation world. The main world was different. Without Tao tablets, spiritium could only be obtained from the universe. If they wanted to reach a higher level, they could only fight for their lives in the void of the universe. Places that were remote had more spiritium. This kind of practical cultivation situation determined that humans wandered around the universe. Naturally, they had a strong grudge with the void natives. This was passed down from generation to generation, and finally it became like this. Just like now. Even if the 4 void beasts were only at the Yuanying level, they relied on their numbers to jump out from behind a meteorite and fiercely pounce down. They didn't even bother to reason with you. As the king of the mountain, he had to pay attention to shouting, "This mountain was opened by me. This tree was planted by me." The void beasts didn't even bother with that. After cleanly getting rid of these blind things, Lu Xiaoyi threw away all distracting thoughts and began to move forward at full speed. In fact, he had a way to avoid the troubles in this area. For example, he could sneak into the negative space to pass through this area. It would save him time and be safer. However, when you treat traveling as a form of cultivation, you can't just think about avoiding some difficulties. You have to face the difficulties head-on. You have to face the dangers head-on. Also, it was time for him to take out some of the sword techniques that he had recently figured out during his travels and try them out. In front of the Hung River people, for some reason, he hid his skills. His hands were itching now. With these living targets that were naturally untainted by karma, what better opponents to test his sword against? Flying and killing along the way could be considered as removing some burden from the universe. Gradually, groups of void beasts began to appear around him. There were more and more of them, and their levels were also getting higher and higher. The challenges were also getting more and more severe. He didn't care. Compared to human cultivators, the most adorable thing about void beasts was that they didn't have those schemes and tricks. They were all head-on collisions. The strong would stand, and the weak would fall. This was the most basic law of the cultivation world. With this dragging and dragging, it was like pulling a beast tide. Countless void beasts were dragged in for no reason. They didn't know why, because there were too many different types of beasts. They only knew that if other beasts ran, they would run too. Just like that, after a few years, They grew from a small group to a large group, from a small beast tide to a large beast tide, until the entire void beast territory became restless, forming a huge beast tide of the void territory that was hard to come by in thousands of years. This was not something that Lu Xiaoyi could control. He didn't care either. It was none of his business who cared. Chapter 1495. The 5 Rings, the dome, was filled with vitality. 100 years had passed since the battle with the Buddhist alliance, and the entire 5 Rings had changed greatly. The sword vein was no exception. To be able to dominate the universe, it was impossible for them to remain stagnant. This was especially so when the battle this time was fought in a rather sullen manner. The external announcement of the victory was for the sake of publicity. Behind closed doors, each and every sect was desperately trying to find the reason why the battle had turned out so badly. After nearly 20,000 years of hard work, they had been successful in every endeavor. However, when it was time to use them, they had not been able to display their full potential. What exactly went wrong? This was the question that every sect and cultivator was thinking about. No one knew the result of their consideration. This was a core secret of the upper echelons of the sect. However, there were some obvious changes in the sect. For example, in the dome, a new sword vein had been added, the coiling sword vein. This was not a completely baseless gimmick, but the result of careful consideration. There was also a considerable number of coiling swordsmen. In fact, they were the 200 heavens chosen men that Lu Xiaoyi had brought back, the people of Zhou Xian. They were able to integrate into the big family of Xianyuan not only because of their novel swordsmanship, but also because of the great effort they had put in for Qing Kong and the 5 Rings. The 300 swordsmen of the sword soldiers had returned, and 100 of them had died in battle. The blood they shed had won them the respect of all the Xianyuan swordsmen. The most important thing was that what they had learned was the legacy of their ancestors. Therefore, it could not be said that they had joined. More accurately, they had returned. A wanderer returning to his home, a swallow returning to its nest. This place was supposed to be their home. It was like the descendants of a large family going to a faraway place. However, their surname and bloodline were still the same. Therefore, there was no problem with the fusion. The problem was that the fusion was too smooth. Now, almost all the outer swordsmen of the dome wanted to join the coiling sword vein. Because this way, they would be infinitely closer to the strength of a true inner swordsman. Actually, the coiling sword should also be called the inner sword. However, it was not coiled in the Naiwan Palace, but in the Dantian. Qianxiu Peak's sword Qi soared to the heavens, and a pavilion master from the pavilion flew into a rage. However, he still couldn't stop the situation from changing. Humans strive for greater heights, and water flows downward. Previously, he had chosen to use the external sword because there was no other way. If he couldn't obtain the sword pellet, how could he learn the internal sword? Now that he could insert the coiling sword into his body on top of the outer swords, it was equivalent to opening a new window for the huge outer swords. How could he possibly control this thought of seeking change? It wasn't just Foundation Establishment Jin Dan who was trying to wield the sword. Even true monarch Yuanying was secretly trying it out. They were all trying to become stronger, and there was no way to stop such thoughts. In fact, the Dome sect had already organized a group of cultivators to study the way of wielding the sword as early as 800 to 900 years ago. Although there were results, it was difficult for them to make up their minds because it might change the overall structure of the Xianyuan sword school forever. The inheritance of the outer swords might disappear. Once the coiling sword was promoted on a large scale, even if the inner sword still had the upper hand in terms of individual combat power, their advantage would be far less obvious than before. In addition, there were more than 10 times the number of inner and outer swords. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Dome sect was going to change. Therefore, they couldn't make up their minds. They couldn't blame the higher-ups of Xianyuan for not having the courage. To change the tens of thousands of years of tradition required a lot of responsibility, and it wasn't something that a few young gods could shoulder. The problem was that in such a crucial direction of the school's inheritance, Xuanyuan's few powerful half-immortals were still unable to pass down instructions. This caused the reform to drag on. There were two reasons for the great changes in the Dome sect. One was the group of swordsman warriors brought back by Liu Xiaoyi. They proved the vitality of the coiling sword with their actual existence. At least in terms of Kung Fu and Taoism, it was feasible and mature. It could directly lead to the Great Tao. Another reason was this war. Although it was just the beginning of the chaos in the universe, the sword cultivators had suffered great losses. In order to increase their survival and fighting ability to the maximum, the sect had officially introduced the coiling sword lineage into the sect. It was inevitable that they would do so. The 6 young gods decided to officially establish the coiling sword in the Dome sect and open it to all outer swordsmen. This caused a huge uproar. For tens of thousands of years, the glorious image of outer swords carrying sword sheaths had always been the main target of ridicule for inner swordsmen. Outer swords dreamed of refining their own flying swords into their bodies, no matter where it was. Even if they hid it in their anus, it would be fine. At most, they would have their backs facing the enemy when they fought in the future. Now they could store swords in their dantian? Could they also emit sword light? Or could they choose between physical swords and sword chi? They no longer had to worry about their flying swords being destroyed by their opponents. They no longer had to worry about whether their opponents were releasing acid rain when they attacked. They no longer had to carry hundreds of swords on their backs as replacements. They no longer had to go bankrupt for the resources of each flying sword. They only had to focus on one sword, and that was their entire life. How could they resist such temptation? The 200 swordsmen in the Sword Soldier Legion became very popular. Everyone wanted to be taught the most direct experience and practical guidance. Of course, in terms of foundation, these swordsmen were far inferior to Dome sect swordsmen. Not to mention inner swords, they couldn't even compare to outer swords because their foundation was mostly unorthodox. However, they had the experience that the Dome sect swords valued the most: how to coiling sword. A year after the official introduction of the coiling sword, 3 outer swords young gods, led by Gong Yao, proposed in a high-level meeting that the coiling sword should be included in the management of the Sword Chi Rushing Heaven Pavilion. To put it bluntly, it was a merger of outer swords and coiling sword. They couldn't disagree, because if they continued like this, they would become a commander without an army in a few years. In fact, they wouldn't even be a commander without an army, because the 3 old young gods had also created coiling swords, and now they didn't carry sword cases. Coiling sword was not difficult for them. Under the difficult tug-of-war, the inner swords had a deep sense of righteousness. They could not understand because they couldn't stop the trend. The coiling sword was destined to rise, and it couldn't be stopped. It was better to incorporate it into the system early. The spring of Xianyuan outer swords had come. The Sword Chi Rushing Heaven Pavilion was divided into 2 factions, coiling sword and outer swords. For the time being, there were still stubborn old people who didn't want to let go of outer swords. However, it was foreseeable that as time passed, outer swords would gradually be preserved only at the basic stage. The higher the realm, the fewer outer swords there would be. It would be until Jin Dan's yuanying that everyone put outer swords into their bodies. This was a great change in the orthodoxy. Seeking new things and changes was always the greatest driving force for the development of human cultivation. It was also the greatest driving force for the development of society. Xianyuan belonged to the category of following the trend. In Gong Yao's words, they would change as powerful as they were. In the future, if there was a new breakthrough in outer swords, everyone would change back together. Of course, there were those who followed the trend of the times, and those who adhered to tradition, such as Weijian Mountain. It wasn't that Xianyuan was reluctant to give up the secret technique, but that Weijian Mountain was as arrogant as before. In their opinion, their outer swords were not much worse than Xuanyuan's inner swords. Even if they became coiling swords, they wouldn't be much stronger. Why should they follow the crowd? There were changes and perseverance. This was the complete cultivation world. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.